Number 7. Valerie Chinelli. In May of 2019, a New York police officer was arrested after it emerged that she'd attempted to orchestrate her estranged husband's murder. The FBI had reportedly been tipped off about 34-year-old Valerie Chinelli's sinister plot by the woman's boyfriend, John Daruba. According to a federal criminal complaint, Chinelli, a 12-year veteran of the NYPD, had approached Daruba in February. She'd expressed an intention of hiring a hitman to kill Isaiah Carvalho, with whom she'd been embroiled in a contentious divorce and custody battle. The officer also reportedly sought to eliminate her boyfriend's teenage daughter, who was only identified in court records as Jane Doe. Chinelli allegedly paid Daruba $7,000 after he claimed to have found someone willing to carry out the murders for that amount. As part of a sting operation organized by federal investigators, the police were sent to Chinelli's home in Oceanside, Long Island, on the morning of May the 17th to notify her that her husband had been murdered. Shortly thereafter, Chinelli received a text message from an FBI agent posing as the hitman Daruba had supposedly hired. The agent instructed her to wire an additional $3,000 as payment for the hit on Daruba's daughter. Later that same day, law enforcement officials took Chinelli into custody, and she was charged with conspiracy to commit murder. She was subsequently held without bail in Central Islip in October of 2021. It was reported that the former NYPD officer had been sentenced to 4 years in federal prison as part of a plea deal with prosecutors. Number 6. Newman Roger. In the early morning hours of October the 18th of 2015, Corey Jones's car broke down on a highway exit ramp in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida. The 31-year-old was heading home after, on the previous night, his band had performed at Johnny Mango's Tiki Bar and Grill in the town of Jupiter. Jones was awaiting the arrival of a tow truck off Interstate 99 when a plainclothes police officer named Newman Roger noticed his disabled vehicle and approached it in an unmarked white van. Jones, who was armed with a firearm for which he had a concealed carry license, reportedly confronted Roger, whom he believed to be a burglar. The officer then discharged a total of 6 shots in the motorist's direction. Jones was hit with 3 bullets, one of which fatally pierced his aorta. Roger, who'd been doing burglary surveillance on the night, later claimed to have been under the impression that Jones was a carjacker. In court, Roger maintained that he'd identified himself as a police officer before firing his gun. His claims were refuted after investigators reviewed a recording of the officer's conversation with Jones, which had been extracted from the victim's cell phone. Not only had Roger neglected to identify himself as a member of law enforcement, he also reportedly hadn't been wearing the designated police vest that his supervisor had instructed him to put on while performing burglary surveillance. Following his criminal trial, Roger was convicted of manslaughter by culpable negligence and attempted first-degree murder with a firearm. He was ultimately sentenced to 25 years in prison. Number 5. Matthew Kinney. At about 2 p.m. on May the 19th of 2019, a boy from Lafayette County, Mississippi, made the horrific discovery that his mother, 32-year-old Dominique Clayton, had been fatally shot in her sleep. It was quickly determined that the mother of 4 had been murdered by an Oxford police officer named Matthew Kinney, who was arrested the following day. During the investigation that followed the shooting, a connection was found between the victim and her killer. It emerged that Kinney, who was married with children at the time, had been having an affair with Clayton. As his shift was nearing its end on May the 19th, the officer reportedly drove his marked police cruiser to Clayton's house and broke in to find that the woman was asleep. He went back to his car and retrieved his Glock 9mm handgun, which he then used to shoot her in the back of the head. Clayton's family later revealed to investigators that she'd become afraid of Kinney and worried he might harm her after she'd told him she might be pregnant. Another version of the underlying motive suggested that Clayton had threatened to divulge the details of their relationship to Kinney's wife after he'd attempted to break up with her. Although prosecutors had initially pursued the death penalty, Kinney was ultimately sentenced to life in prison after reaching a plea deal. Number 4. Henry Soless. Henry Soless, a probationary officer for the Los Angeles Police Department, got into a heated argument with a man at a bar in downtown Pomona, California, on March 13th of 2015, after the man, later identified as 23-year-old Salome Rodriguez, had left the establishment. Soless reportedly followed him on foot. The officer, who was off duty at the time, then fatally shot him multiple times. Soless subsequently fled to the Paso del Norte border crossing in Texas, from where he was escorted into Mexico by his father via a pedestrian bridge. Soless remained in hiding for roughly 2 months until he was eventually tracked down by the authorities. He was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. During his consequent trial, Soless claimed to have been acting in self-defense when he'd shot Rodriguez, a contention that the jury assigned to his case ultimately rejected. In February of 2020, Soless was convicted of murder and later sentenced to 40 years to life in prison. His father was charged with making a false statement to law enforcement after it was discovered that he'd lied about helping his son flee the country. He was sentenced to 3 years of probation and ordered to pay a $1,000 fine. Number 3. Rosemary Ndlovu. South African Police Constable Rosemary Ndlovu was taken into custody in 2018 following the revelation that she'd attempted to orchestrate the murder of her sister. Prior to her arrest, Ndlovu had reportedly been a well-respected member of the South African Police Service, having risen to the rank of sergeant while posted at the Tembisa precinct station. The officer's murderous scheme was exposed by an undercover officer whom Ndlovu had unwittingly hired as a hitman. She was caught on tape enlisting the latter and another man to burn her sister, Joyce, and her 5 children to death inside their house. Ndlovu had allegedly hoped the fire would be viewed as an accident, allowing her to collect the large amount of insurance money that would subsequently be paid out. It soon emerged that the sergeant had previously hired hitmen to carry out the killings of her live-in partner and 5 of her own relatives, all of whom had been murdered at various points between 2012 and 2018. Ndlovu was reportedly living lavishly off the insurance payouts from policies she'd taken out on the victims. According to the South African media outlet News 24, the officer had pocketed nearly $1 million after cashing in on her family's life and funeral insurance. In November of 2021, Ndlovu was sentenced to 6 concurrent life sentences by the South Gauteng High Court in Johannesburg. Number 2. Wayne Couzens. Shortly after 9:30 p.m. on March 3rd of 2021, marketing executive Sarah Everard, aged 33, was arrested by a Metropolitan Police officer in Clapham, South London. The officer, identified as 48-year-old Wayne Couzens, had reportedly stopped the woman on the street as she was walking home from a friend's house. He then proceeded to handcuff her under the false pretense that she'd violated local COVID-19 guidelines. Couzens then forced her into a white car that he'd rented only a few hours earlier. The officer's cell phone was later pinged in the village of Sibbertswold. The authorities would determine it to be the area where the officer had assaulted and fatally strangled Everard in the early morning hours of March 4th. The victim's boyfriend contacted local law enforcement to report her missing later that day, and an investigation into her whereabouts was subsequently set into motion. Roughly a week later, Couzens was arrested on suspicion of kidnapping Everard. They'd been spotted together in CCTV footage corresponding to the night of her disappearance. The following day, the police found human remains in Hodes Wood, near Ashford, and a medical examiner was subsequently able to identify the body as Everard by her dental records. Couzens had allegedly burned the victim's body in a refrigerator before disposing of the remains in a pond near the woods where she was found. The officer pleaded guilty to Everard's murder, and on September the 29th, he was given a whole life sentence, which is the most severe punishment possible under British law. As indicated by an internal affairs investigation, a homicide detective for the Memphis Police Department began a romantic relationship with a woman he'd arrested in connection to a killing in 2018. Bridget Stafford, whom documents identified as a gang member, had been charged by Officer Eric Kelly as an accessory after the fact to the 2017 first-degree murder of a man named Robert Glyden. She later told investigators that the policeman who'd arrested her in April of 2018 had made his intentions known early on. During an interrogation, Kelly reportedly asked Stafford if she was an escort or an exotic dancer, gave her his card and told her to call him. A few months later, they began an affair at around the same time that Kelly was promoted to lieutenant. He had 2 different houses and gave Stafford the keys to his property in Midtown, where she stayed most of the time, as Kelly also had a girlfriend at the time. While in his home, Stafford had access to his guns and took photos with them, which were later posted online. Kelly helped her get a job as an exotic dancer, then sent her money for the outfits she needed at work. The woman reportedly used some of the cash to buy marijuana. Kelly also used city funds to take her on an out-of-town investigative trip to Alabama, where he was looking into a separate murder case. As an investigation into his relationship with Stafford was in its preliminary stages, Kelly secured his pension by abruptly retiring from the force in November of 2019. The following year, the scandal went public and the 50-year-old faced multiple charges of official misconduct. He admitted to have had an intimate relationship with Stafford, but the investigation found that he hadn't used his position to influence her ongoing case. His actions did, however, damage his credibility and ability to testify in other homicide investigations. To avoid jail time, Kelly eventually accepted a plea deal in 2021, admitting a misdemeanor count of misconduct and agreed never to return to law enforcement. Number 5. Shelby Cornelio. Law enforcement in St. Petersburg, Florida, conducted a traffic stop in the early hours of May the 17th of 2022. They identified the driver as 26-year-old Shelby Cornelio, who was a deputy for the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office. Cornelio exhibited signs of impairity that included slurred speech, bloodshot eyes, and being unsteady on her feet. She agreed to field sobriety tests but failed them, and officers found that her blood alcohol level was between 0.206 and 0.291, whereas the legal limit in the state was 0.08. Cornelio was charged with driving under the influence and taken to the Pinellas County Jail without incident. She had been working for the Sheriff's Office since 2018 and was part of its Patrol Operations Bureau, but was immediately terminated following her arrest. Number 4. Jason DePrima. In the fall of 2022, Jason DePrima, the deputy chief of the Cartersville Police Department in Georgia, was visiting Orlando, Florida to attend the annual American Polygraph Association seminar. He didn't take his own vehicle, but one assigned to the department's undercover unit. Upon reaching his destination, 45-year-old DePrima contacted an escort, whom he found in an ad, and agreed to pay $120 for a full service of half an hour. Prior to the conversation, he'd been scammed out of $200 by another alleged escort. She'd asked for the picture of a Cash App card as proof of his ability to pay her, but then used the information he'd provided to take his money. DePrima's second attempt at eliciting escort services would, however, end much worse. The rendezvous took place at an undisclosed location, and the police officer brought $180, which was more than the asking price, as well as a pack of White Claw hard seltzer, which he gave to his illicit date. Unbeknownst to DePrima, the Polk County Sheriff's Office was in the midst of its week-long Operation Fall Haul 2, an undercover investigation aimed at finding and rescuing human trafficking victims. The woman he thought was an escort was actually an undercover detective. On September the 1st of 2022, DePrima was arrested for soliciting escort services and was one of 160 people taken into custody during the operation. DePrima, a graduate of the FBI Academy, was a well-respected officer in his community and had been with the Cartersville Police Department for nearly 3 decades. He was placed on administrative leave following his arrest, but ultimately resigned. Number 3. Jeffrey Warton. In 2020, New Mexico police officer Jeffrey Warton of the Albuquerque Police Department unleashed a brutal attack on his girlfriend. Part of the assault was caught on the Ring doorbell camera of the couple's Rio Rancho residence, and it showed Warton placing the woman in a chokehold and dragging her into their home. She had to be hospitalized after being beaten so badly that she suffered a brain hemorrhage and multiple facial injuries. When Warton showed up for his shift on February the 22nd, other officers informed him that they had a domestic violence warrant for him before placing him under arrest in a body cam recorded incident. A female officer removed his service weapon, gun belt, and gear in what was interpreted by the media as the department underlining the embarrassment that Warton had become for the force. His uniform was cut off his body with scissors while he was handcuffed. He was then escorted to a cruiser and taken to jail, where he'd spend the following 6 months as his trial unfolded. Warton ultimately admitted aggravated battery and was spared further jail time after being given 3 years probation. Number 2. Mikel Popkov. Based on the confessions made following his arrest, former police officer Mikel Popkov is often regarded as Russia's most prolific serial killer. He was mainly active from 1992 to 2010 in his home city of Angarsk and the wider Irkutsk region in Siberia. Popkov preyed on his victims, all but one of whom were women, while wearing his official uniform and offering to give them lifts in his car late at night. The fact that he was a member of law enforcement played a significant role in him gaining their trust. He reportedly chose women whom he considered immoral and who physically resembled his alcoholic mother, who'd abused him as a child. Popkov drove the victims to remote locations where he forced them to undress. He then attacked them in extremely brutal fashion, using a variety of tools that included knives, axes, screwdrivers, or baseball bats. Popkov then had relations with the victims as they were dying or after they were dead before extensively mutilating their remains. He decapitated at least one of them and gouged another's heart out, which led to him being known as the werewolf. At home, the police officer was described as the perfect husband and father. His wife, Elena, was also a member of law enforcement and, while not believed to have been an accomplice, gave alibis for Popkov on several occasions when suspicions for the gruesome murders focused on him. One of the serial killer's surviving victims, named as Svetlana M., clearly identified him as the police officer who'd abducted and abused her in January of 1998. Popkov forced Svetlana, who was then in her teens, to take off her clothes and then smashed her head against a tree, rendering her unconscious. In spite of being left for dead in sub-zero temperatures, the teen survived and subsequently accused him. Elena made up an alibi for her husband and the case was archived, but Svetlana's testimony would provide a vital basis for the investigative efforts that followed. Popkov had eluded the authorities for nearly 2 decades before a combination of factors led to his arrest in 2012. The authorities had found tracks from a Lada 4x4, an off-road vehicle used by the police, at numerous crime scenes following a massive DNA testing operation of Irkutsk police officers. Popkov was a match for genetic material recovered from several victims. Following his arrest, he revealed that he committed the first murder on impulse, saying, "I just felt I wanted to kill a woman I was given a lift to in my car." He was given a life sentence in 2015 for 22 murders and 2 attempted murders. The following year, he confessed to 59 additional killings, 56 of which were confirmed, and he received a second life sentence. In July of 2020, Popkov, then in his mid-50s, revealed he'd been responsible for 2 more killings, bringing his total number of admitted victims to 83. Number 1. Kevin Rodriguez. North Carolina police officer Kevin Rodriguez, aged 33, was arrested by his Raleigh colleagues in February of 2022 after being caught selling cocaine while on duty. The investigation had begun in November of the previous year when confidential sources tipped local law enforcement and the Drug Enforcement Agency that Rodriguez was a dealer. An informant then arranged to meet him for a transaction on January the 24th of 2022. According to a criminal complaint, Rodriguez arrived in uniform and with his duty firearm while driving a marked Raleigh patrol car. He was reported to have turned over 56 grams of cocaine in exchange for $2,600 in cash. The police officer was arrested on charges of drug distribution and possession of a firearm in a drug trafficking crime. At the time, he held the rank of field operations officer but was suspended without pay as an internal affairs investigation was underway. For his crimes, Rodriguez faced a minimum of 5 years in prison and a maximum of life in prison. A married Pennsylvania State Police trooper was accused of abusing his authority when he forcibly arrested his ex-girlfriend, mistress, in August of 2023. 37-year-old Ronald Keith Davis is married and was living with his family in Dauphin County, while his mistress, 37-year-old Mikel Popkov, was living at a trailer he owned. After a 4-month romance, their relationship disintegrated. Out of spite, Davis obtained a petition to have her involuntarily committed to a mental institution. On August the 21st, he was caught on video, arresting her after chasing her down. Davis allegedly sat on Popkov, lay on her, and grabbed her by the legs throughout. In the aftermath, the woman was taken to the hospital, and doctors determined that she wasn't mentally unstable at all. On September the 21st of 2023, Davis was arrested. He was facing several charges, including felony strangulation, unlawful restraint, false imprisonment, simple assault, recklessly endangering another person, and official oppression. Prosecutors said that Davis was held in Dauphin County Prison without bail. Things are probably not looking good for his 9-year career with the force. Number 10. Maricio Garcia. 34-year-old New Jersey man Maricio Garcia was found asleep inside his vehicle by Secaucus police shortly after 3 a.m. on July the 2nd of 2023. His car was stopped in the left-hand turn traffic lane at the intersection of Secaucus Road and County Avenue. Garcia was apparently unaware that he'd fallen asleep behind the wheel. When he was asked if he knew where he was, he responded, "By Hoboken," which was a few miles away from Secaucus. Apparently, he was also having trouble answering simple questions, slurring his words, and eventually struggling with a field sobriety test. He also admitted to having had a couple of drinks and said that he worked for the Union City Police Department. The Secaucus police officer then told him that he might be looking for some kind of preference and asked him why he would even bring that up without being asked. Ultimately, Garcia was arrested and charged with driving while under the influence and reckless driving. Records indicated that this was his second DWI arrest. Subsequent information indicated that he pleaded not guilty to charges on August the 1st. Number 9. Kenneth Booth Jr. In Orange Beach, Alabama, 28-year-old Deputy Kenneth Booth Jr. from the Cullman County Sheriff's Office allegedly killed a colleague whom he was dating. The incident took place during their beach getaway at the Seaside Beach and Racket Club. According to authorities, Booth killed 23-year-old shift supervisor Lexi White on September the 7th of 2023 during an argument that stemmed from unknown reasons. The argument reportedly escalated to the point where Booth eventually pulled out a weapon and shot White. Officials said that later Booth was also found dead. Sheriff Matt Gentry said that everyone in his department was devastated by the shocking incident. Number 8. Jonathan Meerhoff. A video of an off-duty officer from the Chicago Police Department in Illinois berating law enforcement during a traffic stop went viral in 2021. Jonathan Meerhoff was pulled over in July of 2021. CPD body camera footage revealed that Meerhoff was belligerent, yelling profanities throughout the duration of the traffic stop. It was unclear why he was pulled over. Records indicated that he wasn't arrested that night. However, on November the 27th of the subsequent year, he was arrested. A Harrison District Tactical Unit saw Meerhoff's Acura MDX run 2 red lights in the 400 and 500 blocks of South Costner in Chicago at around 8 p.m. on the aforementioned date. When they tried to conduct a traffic stop, the vehicle allegedly sped off. Law enforcement gave chase and eventually caught Meerhoff when he abruptly stopped in the middle of traffic near Independence Boulevard. Meerhoff informed them that he was a police officer. According to the police report, a supervisor let him drive to the Harrison District Station, where he was arrested. He was charged with misdemeanor fleeing and eluding and misdemeanor reckless conduct. Additionally, he was given 4 traffic citations. Meerhoff's vehicle was impounded and his off-duty weapon was seized. In the aftermath, he was stripped of police powers pending an internal investigation. Number 7. Ana Alicia Perez. 2 Florida women were charged with battery for allegedly beating up a man they were both dating. After 34-year-old Ana Alicia Perez and 35-year-old Mila Zuluaga learned they were both in a relationship with the same man, they confronted him shortly before 1 a.m. on May the 26th of 2023. The furious pair showed up at Miller's Ale House in Palmetto Bay, where a verbal dispute between them and the man ensued. Fox News reported that the altercation quickly escalated into a public smackdown. Perez and Zuluaga reportedly struck the man multiple times, leaving him with redness to the face and a small bruise to the lower lip. According to the police, the women were arrested on 1 count each of battery. Zuluaga was taken to the Miami-Dade Police Department's Special Victims Bureau, while Perez was processed and transported to the Turner Guilford Night Correctional Center. Investigators said that Perez thought she was in a monogamous relationship with the man, whose name wasn't released. At the same time, Zuluaga lived with the victim and was pregnant with his child. It was unclear how they discovered the man's alleged infidelity. Perez, who was an officer with the Miami-Dade Police Department, was suspended with pay pending the outcome of the investigation. The department's director, Freddie Ramirez, issued a statement saying that although Perez was off duty, her behavior was unacceptable. Ramirez stated further that he was disappointed by the officer's actions. Number 6. David Hall Dixon. On April the 7th of 2021, 2 gunshot victims were driven by their friend to Prince George's Hospital Center in Cheverly, Maryland. According to police, the 2 victims, 38-year-old James Johnson and 32-year-old Dominique Williams, succumbed to wounds in their rear upper torso 2 days later. Pentagon Force Protection Agency officer David Hall Dixon claimed that Williams, Johnson, and 36-year-old Michael Thomas had attempted to break into cars in his condo parking lot in Tacoma Park. He told investigators that he engaged the trio and opened fire at them when they fled the scene. Surveillance video from the apartment complex showed Dixon, who was off duty at the time, firing into a vehicle as it drove away. He was arrested 2 days after the incident and charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder, 2 counts of using a handgun, and reckless endangerment. He was also facing charges of second-degree murder and using a handgun in the commission of a felony in the assault against 36-year-old Michael Thomas, who police said was the driver of the vehicle Dixon shot up. Investigators later revealed that Dixon's overview of events was inconsistent with the facts in the case and that he had no lawful reason to fatally shoot Williams and Johnson. Tacoma Park Police Chief Antonio Duvall stated. Duvall added that his department had no intention of charging the surviving victim, Thomas, with any crimes. Dixon was booked into the Montgomery County Detention Center without bond and was eventually terminated from his job. As of the latest updates, Dixon pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder and 1 count of first-degree assault on September the 14th of 2023. For accepting a plea deal, the 42-year-old might face up to 30 years behind bars. Number 5. Justin Shields. Shortly before 1 a.m. on April the 14th of 2023, 25-year-old Justin Shields was pulled over by an Ohio State Highway Patrol trooper for speeding on Interstate 275. As the trooper approached the vehicle, Shields rolled down his driver's side window, handed the trooper his license, and then quickly showed the trooper his Cincinnati Police Department badge. The trooper then asked him how much he had to drink, to which Shields responded that he didn't. At the time, the vehicle Shields was driving had expired tags. When the trooper questioned him about it, he raised his voice saying, "I showed you my badge." The trooper then proceeded to give him field sobriety tests. Shields insisted several times throughout his interaction with the trooper that he had had nothing to drink, but he refused the breathalyzer test. After the field sobriety tests, he was arrested for operating a vehicle under the influence. Despite repeatedly insisting he hadn't consumed alcohol, he accidentally admitted that he did when questioned by the trooper one last time. On May the 17th, he pleaded guilty to an amended and lesser charge of physical control while under the influence. According to sentencing documents, Shields was ordered to serve 3 days in a driver's intervention program, 16 hours of community service and 3 years of probation. His license was also suspended for up to 1 year, though he'll be able to drive for his job, medical needs, attending his mandated driving program, and to get groceries on Sundays. Number 4. Colin Snider. Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department were called to the Northwest Valley neighborhood near Buffalo Drive and Regatta Drive at around 2 p.m. on May the 19th of 2022. A dispatcher received a report of a Nevada man who was allegedly impersonating an officer and pointing a gun at a woman When officers arrived, they only found the woman. She then claimed that while she was driving, a man in a truck following behind her was driving in an angry, deranged and aggressive manner, revving loudly. The woman said she got scared, so she slammed on her brakes and got out of the vehicle to confront the driver. The man subsequently parked in the middle of the street and appeared to be wearing a police vest. He then reportedly pointed a gun at her, causing her to scream and run to a neighbor's house. The man was later identified as 32-year-old Colin Snider, who was a local police officer and was off duty at the time. According to law enforcement, a warrant for his arrest was issued on June the 1st. Records show that Snider turned himself in and appeared in court the following day. He claimed that the woman almost hit him head on, so he turned his vehicle around to confront her. Snider was booked into the Clark County Detention Center on 2 counts of assault with a deadly weapon and 1 count of oppression under the color of law. While the investigation continued, he was suspended without pay. Number 3. Salvador Alejandro Sanchez. A federal jury awarded $17 million to the parents of a California man killed by an off-duty Los Angeles Police Department officer at a warehouse store in Corona. The ordeal occurred on the evening of June the 14th of 2019 inside the Costco on McKinley Street, where 32-year-old Kenneth French was shopping with his parents, Russell and Paula French. The off-duty officer, Salvador Alejandro Sanchez, was standing near a sausage sample table in the store when Kenneth suddenly shoved him from behind. Authorities said Sanchez was holding his toddler son in his arms when he was knocked to the ground. Reportedly, he then pulled his pistol, causing Russell to shout out, "Don't shoot, my son is sick." Nevertheless, Sanchez opened fire, killing Kenneth and seriously wounding his parents. The family filed a civil suit against Sanchez, the LAPD, and the city of Los Angeles at the end of 2019, alleging battery, negligence, civil rights violations, and both intentional and negligent infliction of emotional distress. Russell and Paula said that their son had been diagnosed with schizophrenia. Sanchez was later fired after the city's Civilian Board of Police Commissioners determined that Kenneth's conduct didn't present an imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury. On October the 27th of 2021, in the lawsuit filed against the city of LA, the federal jury concluded that Sanchez was acting within the scope of his employment, even though he was off duty at the time. That meant that the city might be liable for much of the rewarded sum. In August of 2022, the California Attorney General charged Sanchez with voluntary manslaughter and assault with a semi-automatic firearm. The 33-year-old is free on a $155,000 bond while awaiting his trial, which is set to begin sometime in late 2023. Number 2. Drew Scott Romo. While being arrested on November the 14th of 2020, California man Drew Scott Romo, who was an officer at the Roseville Police Department, was told he was a disrespect to the law enforcement profession. On that evening, Romo was reportedly removed from a bar on Saddlebag Trail in Scottsdale, Arizona, after a night of partying with friends which had caused him to be overly intoxicated. He subsequently crossed the street and attempted to enter another bar, but was denied entry because of his inebriated state. Apparently, Romo became aggressive and confrontational, screaming at the bar's security personnel and passers-by. When he refused to leave, Scottsdale police were called to the scene. Responding officers explained to Romo that establishments were obligated by law to remove him because he was too intoxicated. When Romo was placed in handcuffs, he said he wanted to go home. He continued being belligerent, telling them he had a law enforcement ID, seemingly thinking he'd get away with his misconduct. One of the officers told him that he was a disgrace. Upon the lieutenant's arrival, Romo's demeanor changed as the volume of his voice toned down. Ultimately, he was arrested on charges of assault and disorderly conduct. Records indicated that Romo's employment with the Rosedale Police Department ended 4 days after his arrest. On March 23, 2021, Romo pleaded guilty to disorderly conduct. The assault charge was dismissed, and he was fined a total of $650. Number 1. Anthony Armbruster. On July the 14th of 2023, an off-duty Ohio police officer was found asleep inside his vehicle along Township Avenue in Cincinnati. St. Bernard police received a report about the man and were called to the location. Responding officers found the man, identified as 28-year-old Anthony Armbruster, slumped behind the wheel of the car. According to responding officers, the 28-year-old had a lingering odor. Armbruster, who was an Elmwood Place police officer, claimed that he wasn't going to work in the morning. Reportedly, he was given multiple sobriety tests, during one of which he lost balance. After failing the sobriety tests and refusing to take a breathalyzer, he was taken into custody for allegedly driving under the influence. After the arrest, Armbruster turned in his equipment and resigned, according to the Elmwood Place Police Department. During his arraignment, he pleaded not guilty and his driver's license was suspended. Court records indicated that this wasn't Armbruster's first time being accused of a crime. In 2022, he was convicted of 2 counts of endangering the welfare of his children after they were found with bruises and abrasions on them. He was only sentenced to probation. Nearly 2 months after his DUI arrest, Armbruster was again arrested for being intoxicated and disorderly in Green Township. A criminal complaint stated that he had a heated argument with his mother and brother in a parking lot, during which he allegedly threw his brother to the ground. Armbruster was charged with disorderly conduct and was released the following day on his own recognizance. Number 7. Nicollet Munas. Officer Nicollet Munas was investigated by her own colleagues at the San Antonio Police Department following allegations that she'd assaulted a love rival. In April of 2019, a report created in connection to the incident detailed how Munas, a 3-year veteran of the force, had FaceTimed former SAPD officer Kenneth Moreno, with whom she was allegedly having an affair. The call was answered by Moreno's girlfriend, however, and an argument between the 2 women subsequently ensued. Munas eventually coaxed a rival into revealing her home address, and the off-duty officer then went to her residence in the early hours of the morning to confront her. Upon Munas's arrival, reports indicated that there was a physical altercation between the women. The officer allegedly elbowed the homeowner in the stomach and struck her in the face and neck in an attempt to elicit a similarly violent reaction. Rather than strike Munas in retaliation, however, Moreno's girlfriend called the police. It was later discovered that Moreno himself had been hiding in the backyard before he ultimately left the premises through a back alleyway. Officer Munas was arrested and placed on administrative leave following the incident. Although she'd initially faced criminal charges, they were later dropped due to insufficient evidence. In June of 2020, Munas reportedly told a fellow SAPD officer that she'd been in contact with Moreno, which violated the terms of the order she'd received from her superiors to stay away from her former romantic partner. She was consequently issued a 15-day suspension in mid-December of 2020. Number 6. Maria Velez. In 2015, Ohio woman Maria Velez left her job as a bilingual teacher's aide at Clark School to enter Cleveland's Police Academy. In December of that year, the 22-year-old reportedly started working basic patrol in the department's 5th district. The mother of a male student came forward in September of 2017 to report that the officer had had an inappropriate relationship with her son during her time as a teacher's aide. Velez allegedly had several intimate encounters with the respective student throughout much of 2015. In response to the accusations against the young officer, detectives in the Cleveland Police Department's Internal Affairs Unit launched an investigation into the matter. It led to Velez being arrested during her shift on October the 19th. She was charged with multiple offenses, including attempted tampering with evidence and intimidation of a crime victim or witness. The charges stemmed from a phone call she'd reportedly made to the victim's mother, in which she told her to lie about the illicit relationship when questioned by investigators. It was reported that the patrol woman agreed to resign from the police department in the wake of her arrest. In April of 2018, Velez pleaded guilty to the charges levied against her and was ultimately sentenced to 24 months in prison plus 5 years of supervised release. Number 5. Davin Cole. At around 6 p.m. on November the 3rd of 2021, off-duty San Francisco Police Sergeant Davin Cole entered a Rite Aid in San Mateo. Cole, who was allegedly armed with a loaded firearm that wasn't his service weapon, handed the pharmacist a note demanding painkillers for which he didn't have a prescription. It's unclear if anything was ultimately stolen, but Cole was confronted by 2 San Mateo police officers upon exiting the store. They tackled the off-duty sergeant to the ground after he'd resisted arrest, and he was eventually taken into custody on suspicion of robbery. Cole was reportedly admitted to a rehabilitation facility after posting bail. The suspect's attorney detailed how his client had secretly been battling an addiction to painkillers ever since a doctor had prescribed them to him for a severe canine bite in 2010. He also revealed the darkly ironic fact that Cole had been working in the police department's Healthy Streets Outreach Command and Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion Program, where he helped individuals with substance abuse issues stay off the streets. He was placed on unpaid leave pending an internal investigation into his arrest. Cole reportedly appeared in court via video conference in February of 2022. Number 4. Dave Rodriguez. California man Don McComas uploaded a video to YouTube on July the 29th of 2015 which showed a troubling encounter he'd had with a local police officer in front of his Ronald Park residence. During the 5-minute clip that went viral on social media in the incident's aftermath, McComas noticed a police cruiser slowly approaching his house while he was hooking a boat up to his vehicle in his driveway. After a couple of minutes, the officer inside the patrol car was shown taking a picture of McComas with his own cell phone. He then exited the car and approached the homeowner, ordering him to take his hand out of his pocket. The officer subsequently unholstered his service weapon and pointed it at the ground. McComas maintained that he'd done nothing wrong and asked the policeman if he was suspected of committing a crime. The officer admitted that the homeowner wasn't under any such suspicion, and he then walked back to his cruiser before leaving the scene. The Santa Rosa Press Democrat later identified the officer in the video as Dave Rodriguez. Ronald Park Police Chief Brian Masterson reportedly declined to comment on the incident, and it was reported that the city of Ronald Park would investigate the matter. The official probe concluded that Officer Rodriguez had acted within his rights during his interaction with McComas. The latter filed a lawsuit against the city seeking more than $25,000 in damages for what he described as a violation of his civil rights and the negligent infliction of emotional distress. Court documents indicated that a settlement was eventually reached by the 2 parties, but the specifics of the agreement weren't made available to the public. Number 3. Rodney Dun. On July the 9th of 2020, Arkansas woman Nicole Harper was traveling on U.S. Highway 167 in the city of Jacksonville. The 38-year-old woman, reported as being pregnant at the time, was clocked at a speed of 84 miles per hour in a 70-mile-per-hour zone by Arkansas State Trooper Rodney Dun. The officer subsequently began pursuing Harper, who didn't immediately pull over to the shoulder. The woman would later justify the delay by explaining that she didn't think there was sufficient space for her vehicle. Instead of instantly stopping, Harper had reportedly reduced her speed to that of roughly 60 miles per hour and turned on her hazard lights as she searched for a safe location to pull over. Dunn, however, believed that the woman was attempting to flee from him. The trooper then rammed Harper's bumper in an attempt to execute a pursuit intervention technique, commonly referred to as a pit maneuver. The woman's car was sent careening into the adjacent lanes before it flipped over and slid to a complete halt. Harper reportedly avoided any serious injury during the accident, and her baby was ultimately born without complication a few months later. She was, however, charged with speeding and failing to yield to an emergency vehicle. Harper subsequently filed a civil lawsuit against the state of Arkansas, and in November of 2021, the 2 sides reportedly reached a settlement agreement. Court records detailed how the agreement would lead to policy changes on the use of pit maneuvers by state police. Number 2. Daria, Jalali, and Austin Hopp. On June the 26th of 2020, an elderly Colorado woman named Karen Garner exited a Walmart location in the city of Loveland with $14 worth of unpaid merchandise. Employees at the store detected the theft and retrieved the items from the 73-year-old, who allegedly pulled off one of the workers' face masks during a minor altercation that ensued. Garner subsequently began walking home, and the employees contacted local police to report the incident. A first-year officer with the Loveland Police Department named Austin Hopp found Garner picking flowers in a field alongside the road a short time later. Hopp reportedly approached the woman aggressively with the intention of arresting her. Garner, who appeared scared and confused in video captured by the officer's body cam, started to walk away from him, at which point he grabbed her arms and pulled them backwards in order to handcuff her. The officer then forced the 80-pound woman to the ground repeatedly as she continually attempted to get up and walk home. Officer Daria Jalali arrived at the scene soon after that and helped Hop hold down Garner against the hood of a patrol car and hog-tie her. A bystander reportedly questioned the officer's use of force on the frail woman, but Jalali and Hop dismissed their concerns. Garner was taken to the police station where she was handcuffed to a bench as a small group of officers laughed and joked while watching Hop's body cam footage of the arrest. In the aftermath of the incident, it emerged that Garner had sustained a fractured arm, a dislocated shoulder, a sprained wrist, and several bruises on her body as a result of the officer's aggressive exertion of force. It was also revealed that the woman suffered from dementia and sensory aphasia. Garner filed a federal lawsuit against the city of Loveland and 5 members of the police department in April of 2021. The elderly woman was ultimately awarded a $3 million payout after a settlement was reached, and officers Jalali and Hop resigned from the department after facing criminal charges. The latter's trial was scheduled to begin on April the 18th of 2022. Number 1. Yvonne Wu. On the evening of October the 13th of 2021, an off-duty New York police officer named Yvonne Wu broke into her ex-girlfriend's Brooklyn apartment and lay in wait. Shortly after Wu had arrived on the premises, 23-year-old Jenny Lee arrived home with her new girlfriend, Jamie Liang, aged 24. Wu confronted them and promptly opened fire, shooting both women in the torso. One of the victims was able to contact 911, and Wu could reportedly be heard in the background of the phone call screaming, "I told you not to mess with me." When officers made their way to the scene, they came upon Wu standing outside the apartment, and she was then taken into custody without incident. Lee and Liang were both transported to the hospital following the shooting. The latter passed away a short time later, while Lee was stabilized by doctors and ultimately survived the shooting. Wu was taken to Maimonides Medical Center, where she underwent a psychiatric evaluation. The 5-year police veteran was charged with murder and attempted murder in connection to the Love Triangle shooting. In January of 2022, the slain woman's family announced their plans to file a $25 million lawsuit against the New York Police Department and the City of New York. The family alleged that the police department had acted negligently in allowing Officer Wu to retain her service weapon in spite of the fact that they were aware of her distressed emotional state that had been exacerbated by her contentious breakup with Lee. A fiery police encounter unfolded inside a terminal at Miami International Airport on June the 30th of 2020. A body cam video of the incident was posted on social media by South Florida filmmaker Billy Corbin. The footage showed Miami-Dade police officer Anthony Rodriguez, along with colleagues, speaking to a young woman at the gate. Police had been called to the scene after the woman, 21-year-old Paris Anderson, started loudly complaining about being kept off a flight to Chicago because she was belligerent and intoxicated. Anderson argued with airline employees until law enforcement's arrival, whereupon the situation escalated. She refused to leave and allegedly made a comment about striking the ticket agent behind the counter. At one point in the body cam video, Anderson taunted Rodriguez, saying, "You acting like you white when you really black. What you want to do?" According to a police report, she then made contact with the officer's chin with her face, to which he responded by delivering a forceful punch to the young woman's head. She was swiftly taken to the ground and handcuffed, and later charged with felony battery of a law enforcement officer. Shortly after the arrest, however, the case against Anderson was dropped by prosecutors. Meanwhile, Rodriguez was relieved of duty as the Miami-Dade Police Department prepared to fire him. His termination was opposed by the South Florida Police Benevolent Association. The matter ultimately ended in arbitration, allowing Rodriguez to retire and receive back pay. Number 9. Brandon Gaddy. Shortly after 10 p.m. on September the 28th of 2018, an individual called 911 to report that California man Richard John Sanchez was threatening members of his family with a gun. Prior to officers' arrival at the scene, Sanchez's sister-in-law called again to say that she'd escaped from the home with children, but there were still other family members stuck inside with the armed man. According to witness testimony, Sanchez was heavily intoxicated and making incoherent statements in which he claimed to hold control over everyone because he was God. At the time, the 27-year-old had an active felony warrant, which officers were aware of when they showed up at the family's San Bernardino residence. As shown in stunning body cam footage, police commanded Sanchez to drop his weapon and exit the house. The man subsequently placed the gun on a couch and walked out the front door. Officers ordered him to put his hands up, which he did as he continued walking towards them. As Sanchez approached, Officer Brandon Gaddy opened fire, unloading 5 rounds. In the footage, the suspect was shown clutching his chest as he collapsed on the front lawn. The man later succumbed to his injuries at the hospital. Following the incident, Gaddy was forced to resign from the force. The San Bernardino District Attorney's Office revealed that they'd be investigating the matter to determine whether the former officer should face criminal charges, though none were announced in the shooting's immediate aftermath. Number 8. Gregory Damon. Officers from the Tampa Police Department in Florida were called to the Tampa Family Health Center on November the 17th of 2022. There had been reports of a woman sleeping outside the property and refusing to leave. Back in October, the same individual had reportedly been issued a warning and arrested by Officer Gregory Damon for trespassing in the same location. Damon was also among the officers dispatched to the health center on the day in question. The woman, who wasn't identified, was subsequently taken to the Orient Road jail, but refused to exit the squad car, as shown in body cam footage. At some point, Damon grabbed the detainee by the arm and proceeded to drag her across the parking garage and into the jail. The officer exchanged vulgar and obscene language with the woman, who wasn't injured. The following day, the department was alerted to the incident by the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office. Damon was relieved of duty pending an investigation into his actions, which ultimately led to his termination in December. Number 7. Anthony Duran. The Pinal County Sheriff's Office in Arizona launched an investigation into one of its own officers, Anthony Duran, in March of 2018. The findings of the internal probe became public after a man filed a civil complaint accusing Duran and others of beating and falsely arresting him during a search of his Superior residence in 2016. The litigation alleged that law enforcement in Superior, a small mining town with a population of about 3,000, hired multiple police officers with checkered histories in order to save money. The department investigation into Duran came about after he allegedly used his police body camera to film himself having intercourse in his office. The man was also accused of storing explicit material on an office computer, per court documents relating to the probe. An office secretary found a flash drive connected to Duran's computer. The drive contained the body cam video along with 36 gigabytes worth of explicit photos. Duran publicly denied having intercourse while on duty and also maintained that the flash drive had nothing to do with work. He was nevertheless fired from the police department. Number 6. Jonathan Moreno. In July of 2021, internet users circulated a police body cam video in which a pair of South Carolina men were arrested following a physical confrontation with officers. The incident occurred on June the 23rd when Rock Hill police pulled over a vehicle for allegedly making an illegal turn near the Valero gas station on Willowbrook Avenue. According to law enforcement, they found drugs inside the car as well as a firearm, which the driver, Ricky Price, was not legally permitted to own. At some point during the traffic stop, Ricky's brother Travis approached the officers. He was reportedly trying to retrieve some of Ricky's jewelry, but Officer Jonathan Moreno evidently took issue with his close proximity to the scene. Moreno proceeded to shove Travis into a propane tank and eventually forced him to the ground, imploring the man to stop crying as he placed him in handcuffs. Travis was initially charged with hindering police, but the case against him was dropped after the Rock Hill City solicitor stated that he was charged in error. Moreno reportedly included
inaccurate information in the incident's official police report. In order to justify his use of force, he falsely indicated that Travis had initiated and escalated the physical altercation following the emergence of the body cam video. The officer faced heavy backlash. An investigation was launched, ultimately leading to his termination. The disgraced officer, who was charged with misdemeanor assault and battery for taking Travis to the ground, appeared at a press conference prior to being booked at the detention center. He apologized to Travis directly as well as the community at large, stating, "I'm here to be held accountable for my actions." In January of 2022, he was found not guilty of his criminal charges and even went on to run for York County Council. A couple of months later, Travis was awarded $500,000 in a lawsuit against the city of Rock Hill that was settled in November of 2023. Number 5. David Lance Jukes. Just after 5 p.m. on July the 26th of 2021, police in Orangeburg, South Carolina were dispatched to the Colleton Village townhomes to investigate a 911 call about a male suspect with a gun. A police report stated that a female resident accused a man identified as Clarence Gaillard of banging on her door and window trying to enter her home. The report mentioned that the woman described as Gaillard's relative claimed that the man had a gun in the waistband of his jean shorts. However, she later said that she'd never seen a gun in the man's possession. Upon arrival, officers located Gaillard in the parking lot with a stick wrapped in shiny silver tape, which he reportedly used to protect himself against stray dogs. Officer David Lance Jukes, whose service weapon was drawn, ordered the man as well as his cousin, Demario Julian, to get on the ground. Though both men complied, Gaillard's movements were measured because of an injury caused by a traffic accident that forced him to use a cane. The crash happened about 2 years prior, leaving the 58-year-old with rods and surgical pins in his leg, knee, and hip. Angered by Gaillard's slow pace, Officer Jukes approached the man and stomped on his neck and head, which violently struck the concrete. One of Jukes' colleagues, Sergeant Aquele Polidor, subsequently stepped in to de-escalate the situation, allowing Gaillard to stand back up as she calmly asked him questions. Polidor repeatedly asked Jukes and colleague Brandy Smith if the victim needed medical attention, but they didn't answer her. Gaillard was eventually taken to the emergency room for treatment. When body cam footage of the incident was released, Jukes was promptly fired and charged with first-degree assault and battery. As of November of 2023, there had been little movement on the case in over 2 years. Meanwhile, Gaillard was awarded $650,000 as part of a lawsuit against the city of Orangeburg. Number 4. Rose Valentino. In the late summer of 2022, the Cincinnati Police Department announced that the city manager approved a recommendation from the interim police chief that Officer Rose Valentino be fired. The latter, who'd been on the force for 14 years, was stuck in traffic near Western Hills University High School and District 3 Police Headquarters on April the 5th of that year. Her body-worn camera caught her using a racial slur while voicing her frustration with another vehicle that was blocking an exit. Valentino, who made regular appearances on the TLC series Police Women of Cincinnati, was removed from patrol duty in August following an internal investigation. The woman claimed that she'd been desensitized to racially offensive language by music and hearing people talk on the street. Following Valentino's eventual termination, Cincinnati's police chief stated that the former officer's ready use of the racial slur tarnished her ability to work with any community member. Valentino fought the decision, filing a grievance seeking reinstatement, which ultimately proved unsuccessful. Number 3. Jeffrey Robillard. A senior officer from the Tacoma Police Department in Washington unwittingly recorded an intimate encounter in his patrol car while on duty in December of 2021. Jeffrey Robillard, a patrol specialist and officer since August of 1995, reportedly met up with his mistress in a Tacoma Dome parking lot after responding to 5 service calls On the morning of December the 14th, at some point, Robillard's body camera was turned on, capturing him and the woman in an unbecoming position in his patrol vehicle. Roughly 30 seconds into the recording, the officer turned the camera off, but the damage had already been done. According to investigative documents, the woman recalled Robillard saying, "Well, you might not hear from me for a while," in reference to the video. Later that morning, Robillard, along with a union representative, confessed to internal affairs that he'd had intercourse in his patrol vehicle and accidentally recorded it on video. He was immediately placed on administrative leave. During the ensuing investigation, it emerged that Robillard had been having an extramarital affair with the woman shown in the body cam footage. To circumvent the man's wife, the unnamed mistress would sometimes send messages to his department email account. On March the 17th of 2022, Robillard was fired for the on-duty rendezvous and for using department resources to facilitate his affair. Number 2. Matthew Kavinda. In June of 2021, officers from the St. Petersburg Police Department in Florida responded to a call about a panhandler trespassing at a local gas station. Officer Matthew Kavinda and his partner made contact with the suspect, 64-year-old Timothy Grant, who was in a wheelchair. Law enforcement ran the man's name through their database and learned that he had 5 active warrants. Body cam footage showed the officers ordering the man to stand up from his wheelchair as they allegedly saw him walking around the gas station while he was panhandling. Grant asked why he was being arrested as the officers tried to forcibly lift him up. He ended up on his back, at which point Kavinda warned that he was going to get tased if he didn't cooperate. Grant was then flipped over onto his stomach and had his hands pulled behind his back. Kavinda subsequently deployed his taser, and Grant could be heard crying out in pain. St. Petersburg police later clarified that the man wasn't being physically resistant towards the officers during the arrest. Nevertheless, Kavinda tased him a total of 4 times, for which he was ultimately terminated following an internal review of the incident. Grant, meanwhile, faced the charge of resisting arrest without violence. Number 1. Alfred Flores, Eleazar Alejandro, and Nathaniel Villalobos. Shortly after midnight on June the 23rd of 2023, a trio of San Antonio police officers were dispatched to an apartment building. The department had received reports of a woman allegedly cutting wires to one of the complex's fire alarms. Upon arrival, the officers spotted the suspect speaking to a fire official outside and urged her to talk to them instead, saying, "Hey lady, get over here," as heard in body cam footage. The woman, 46-year-old Melissa Perez, ignored their instruction, then ran back to her apartment and locked the door. Sergeant Alfred Flores, along with officers Eleazar Alejandro and Nathaniel Villalobos, followed her. They tried to remove a window screen, to which Perez responded by tossing a candlestick at them and saying, "Stop it, you ain't got no warrant." One of the officers subsequently warned, "You're going to get shot." But the woman seemed unfazed by the threat, saying, "Shoot me, you ain't got no warrant." In the footage, the sound of glass breaking could be heard, followed by 2 rounds of gunshots. Authorities later contextualized the video, revealing that one of the cops opened fire after Perez swung a hammer in their general direction, but hit the window instead. All 3 of the officers started shooting when the woman then approached the window with the hammer still in tow. The gunshot wounds Perez sustained ultimately proved unsurvivable, and she was pronounced dead at the scene. Within 24 hours of the incident, Flores, Alejandro, and Villalobos were each arrested on murder charges. They were suspended from the force without pay as the investigation into their encounter with Perez unfolded. County jail records indicated that the 3 cops were released from custody on $100,000 bonds each. Officials determined that Perez didn't pose an imminent threat of serious bodily injury or death prior to the shooting because the officers had a wall, a window blocked by a television, and a locked door between them. It also emerged that Perez was in the midst of a mental health crisis at the time of her run-in with police. Her family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the city of San Antonio. and the 3 officers involved. As of the latest updates, the case was still ongoing.
On November the 19th of 2021, the police in Sunrise, Florida, arrested a man by the name of Jean Similian, who was accused of attacking people at a local business. The suspect was handcuffed, but officers struggled to wrangle him into the back of the squad car. It was around that time that Sergeant Christopher Pulley's, a 21-year veteran of the force, arrived at the scene. Pulley's, with a can of pepper spray in hand, hurtled out of his vehicle and made a beeline towards Similian, who finally agreed to get into the car as the sergeant was swiftly approaching. Despite the suspect's newfound cooperation, Pulley's didn't relent as he subsequently berated and threatened the man. He repeatedly told Similian to look him in the eyes before stating he was the wrong cop to play with. The suspect appeared to relish the sergeant's aggression and proceeded to egg him on, saying, "Do what you gotta do, man. You gonna mace? Mace me." As Pulley's profane threats continued, a female officer rushed up behind him and tugged on his belt, imploring him to ease off. At that point, Pulley shifted his ire towards her, shouting, "Don't ever touch me again," as he reached out to grab her by the neck. With both hands wrapped squarely around his colleague's throat, the enraged officer pushed her back, then instructed everyone at the scene to turn off their body cameras. However, Pulley's outburst up to that point had already been recorded in its entirety. Speaking to a local media outlet in the incident's aftermath, Sunrise Police Chief Anthony Rosa called Pulley's behavior that day disgusting and unprofessional, saying the body cam video speaks for itself. In the summer of 2022, it was announced that the disgraced cop, who'd already been relieved of supervisory duties and placed under internal investigation, was being criminally charged with felony battery, assault, and tampering with evidence. The following November, Pulley's retired from the force amid his ongoing legal proceedings. Number 6. Andrew Lawson. A pair of deputies from the Brevard County Sheriff's Office in Florida had their lives and careers irrevocably derailed as a result of an incredibly reckless decision made on December the 4th of 2022. In addition to being colleagues, deputies Andrew Lawson and Austin Walsh, both in their early 20s, were described as best friends and roommates. While off duty on the day in question, the two had been playing video games at their Palm Bay home but decided to take a break. Shortly thereafter, Lawson reportedly brandished a firearm and jokingly pointed it at Walsh. The former then pulled the trigger twice, erroneously believing the weapon to have been unloaded. Walsh was struck in the head by the bullet that was accidentally discharged, and although his panicked roommate immediately dialed 911, there was no chance of saving his life. The county sheriff said he was devastated upon receiving news of the incident, recalling his close relationships with both Walsh and Lawson. The latter was taken to the Brevard County Jail on manslaughter charges. He cooperated fully with the investigation, having been left distraught by his life-altering recklessness. After posting his $15,000 bail, Lawson moved back in with his mother while awaiting his next court appearance, slated for April of 2023. In the meantime, his employment with the Brevard County Sheriff's Office was terminated. Number 5. Nathaniel Hendren. In January of 2019, St. Louis police officer Nathaniel Hendren and his partner were hanging out at his South City home, despite the fact that they were on duty and supposed to be patrolling elsewhere. They were joined by 24-year-old Caitlin Alex, a fellow St. Louis officer and married military veteran who was off duty at the time. According to subsequent reports, Hendren and Alex used the revolver to engage in a reckless game of Russian roulette. Hendren reportedly emptied the weapon, then placed a single bullet back into the cylinder and gave it a spin. He pointed the gun away from him and pulled the trigger to no effect. Alex subsequently took the revolver and aimed it at Hendren and pulled the trigger, but it once again did not fire. Then Hendren pointed it at Alex and again pulled the trigger, but this time the weapon discharged. The bullet struck the young woman in the chest, and although the male officers rushed her to the hospital, she was later pronounced dead. While at the hospital, Hendren allegedly told his supervisor that the shooting was accidental and that he wouldn't want to harm Alex because he was in love with her and they were in an intimate relationship. He further indicated that they were planning on moving in together. Shortly after the incident, Hendren resigned from the force
He also faced criminal charges of involuntary manslaughter, to which he ultimately pleaded guilty. Hendren was consequently sentenced to 7 years behind bars, a punishment Alex's mother felt was far too lenient. While speaking with the local press, the woman said, "He should have gotten life in prison if it was up to me." In November of 2022, Hendren was denied parole, forcing him to serve out his entire term. Number 4. Harlem Brawl. In June of 2019, an alarming video surfaced online in which a pair of New York City police officers could be seen brawling with one another at the corner of West 116th Street and Lenox Avenue in Harlem. In the footage, 2 marked NYPD patrol cars, one with flashing lights, were shown parked along the side of the street. At one point, a uniformed officer emerged from the driver's seat of one of the vehicles and forcefully shoved another cop, after which a scuffle ensued. As the warring colleagues continued grappling with one another, one of them pressed the other against the side of one of the parked SUVs. Other NYPD officers eventually stepped in to break up the fight. The incident sparked an internal department review, although it's unclear how the investigation played out, and no details regarding what had triggered the dispute were made readily available to the public. Number 3. Aaron Wright. 3 officers from the Lafayette Police Department in Indiana were dispatched to a local residence in search of a wanted fugitive on January the 8th of 2019. Although the suspect wasn't present at the home, the trio of officers, which included Lane Butler and her partner Aaron Wright, were met by a large and aggressive dog, prompting them to retreat outside. As they did so, however, Wright accidentally discharged his service weapon while following closely behind Butler, striking her in the shoulder. In body cam footage of the incident, Butler was shown collapsing to the ground immediately. While the third officer rushed over to tend to her, Wright flagged down another police car responding to the scene and placed his injured partner in the back seat, but an ambulance subsequently arrived to take her to the hospital. Although it wasn't visible in the video, the department later revealed that Wright had been attacked by the dog from behind, which allegedly caused the accidental discharge of his firearm. The Lafayette police chief said the incident hadn't been the result of an act of negligence, carelessness, or otherwise reckless behavior, but rather an unfortunate sequence of circumstances. Butler, who was only days away from celebrating her 3rd anniversary with the department, was brought to Franciscan Health Lafayette East in serious but stable condition. In a social media update posted about a week later, it was revealed that she'd been released from hospital. It was also reported that Wright wouldn't face disciplinary repercussions for his role in the accident. Number 2. Stephen Green and Joseph Tyler. In the early hours of March 25th of 2016, a handful of officers from the Atlanta Police Department congregated for dinner at the R. Thomas restaurant in Buckhead at the end of a late-night shift. According to a statement later released by a department spokesperson, 2 of the officers, later identified as Stephen Green and Joseph Tyler, started bantering back and forth about who would win in a foot race. Despite the seemingly trivial topic of conversation, tensions between the 2 men eventually escalated, and Tyler threatened to punch Green in the face. The latter was initially taken aback by his colleague's hostility, but when Tyler issued a second threat, the 2 men came to blows and ultimately needed to be separated by the other officers. At some point during the altercation, Tyler allegedly pulled out his service weapon, but no shots were fired. Green, who'd been an Atlanta police officer for 5 years, was placed on administrative leave in the wake of the incident. Tyler, meanwhile, was also suspended but subsequently resigned from the force 5 days later. Number 1. Ismael Tamayo. A shooting at Stoddard Wells off-highway vehicle area, an unincorporated section of Apple Valley, California, was reported to the authorities during the early hours of May the 3rd of 2020. Deputies from the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Office subsequently arrived at the scene to find 3 off-duty Los Angeles police officers, one of whom was suffering from a gunshot wound to the upper body. The victim, Mark Mascherano, was airlifted to a nearby trauma center where he was reportedly kept in stable condition. The ensuing investigation uncovered that the man had been shot by his colleague, 44-year-old Ismael Tamayo, while they and an off-duty supervisor were shooting guns on a camping trip. Tamayo was initially arrested on attempted murder charges, but later pleaded not guilty to a felony count of assault with a firearm. His police powers were stripped pending the outcome of both his criminal proceedings as well as an internal administrative review. In April of 2021, an article in the LA Times went into great detail regarding Tamayo's documented mental health struggles. which was said to have played a large factor in the shooting. The man's attorney stated that at the time he fired his weapon at Mascherano, he was suffering from PTSD-related disassociation, which allegedly caused him to revert back to his military training, believing he was in a combat setting. The incident had also been precipitated by the trio of officers drinking copious amounts of alcohol for multiple hours, which was cited as another contributing factor.
Florida woman Mayara Alejandra Martinez sued the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, alleging excessive force during her arrest. Martinez was violently taken into custody on April the 27th of 2016. It was her first day of work at the Scores Gentlemen's Club on University Boulevard. She became intoxicated on the job during that first day and was told to leave. When she refused, the police were called. Responding officers tried to take her into custody, but she resisted. They managed to cuff her, but she still didn't cooperate. When one of the officers, Akinyemi Borisade, told Martinez to leave the area, she tried to hit him. Surveillance footage showed Borisade consequently shoving Martinez against a wall. After she appeared to try to kick him, the officer struck her several times in rapid succession while she was still handcuffed. The onslaught knocked the woman out cold. In the wake of the incident, Borisade was arrested for simple battery and fired from the department. In October, he pleaded no contest and was sentenced to the 1 day he'd already served behind bars. Additionally, he was ordered to have no contact with the victim and fined $655. In the same month, Martinez pleaded guilty to 1 count of resisting an officer without violence and was sentenced to 1 year of probation and 50 hours of community service. In July of 2020, the 31-year-old was awarded a $92,500 settlement in the suit against the sheriff's office. Number 10. Jordan Steinker and Pablo Vasquez. A pair of police officers in Colorado had their careers destroyed as a result of an incredibly reckless decision they made on September the 16th of 2022. The incident unfolded when Sergeant Pablo Vasquez from the Platteville Police Department pulled over 20-year-old Yereni Rios Gonzalez on a rural road near the U.S. Highway 85. Vasquez questioned her about a suspected road rage incident during which the woman had allegedly pointed a gun at another motorist. Officer Jordan Steinker from the Fort Lupton Police Department arrived at the scene after Vasquez had requested backup. Steinker placed Rios Gonzalez in handcuffs and locked her in Vasquez's police SUV, which was parked on railroad tracks. Body camera and dashboard camera footage showed that a freight train was approaching the SUV with its horn blaring, but apparently the officers were oblivious to the warning sounds. Moments later, the train smashed into the SUV, dragging it down the tracks with the restrained suspect still inside. Rios Gonzalez suffered a brain injury, 9 broken ribs, a broken arm, broken teeth, a fractured sternum, and leg injuries. Fortunately, she survived the terrifying crash. She later pleaded no contest to misdemeanor menacing in connection with the road rage incident and would receive a deferred sentence. In November, the Weld County District Attorney's Office filed charges against Steinker and Vasquez. The former was charged with attempted felony reckless manslaughter and 2 misdemeanors, and the latter was accused of reckless endangerment, obstructing a highway, careless driving, and illegal parking. After several internal investigations by the Internal Affairs Department, Vasquez was fired from the Platteville PD. Steinker was also terminated from the force after she was convicted of reckless endangerment and assault. Weld County District Court Judge Timothy Kearns said he'd initially planned to sentence the former Fort Lupton policewoman to prison, but changed his minds after both prosecutors and defense attorneys argued for probation. In September of 2023, Kearns sentenced Steinker to 30 months of supervised probation and required her to perform 100 hours of community service. The 29-year-old sobbed through her sentencing and apologized to the victim, saying she'd never intended for another person to be harmed, especially under her watch. The latest updates indicated that Vasquez was still awaiting her trial and that Rios Gonzalez had sued the police agency seeking compensation for the alleged mishandling behavior during the incident. Number 9. officers from the New Haven Police Department. The police chief of the New Haven Police Department in Connecticut recommended that a handful of officers be fired after they'd recklessly dragged a paralyzed suspect who was in their custody and falsely accused him of being intoxicated. On June the 19th of 2022, Richard Randy Cox was arrested on suspicion of illegally possessing a handgun. The 36-year-old was handcuffed and placed in the back of a police van without being secured with a seatbelt. As Cox was being transported, another vehicle abruptly pulled out from a side street, almost causing a collision. Officer Oscar Diaz, who was driving, quickly braked hard to avoid hitting the other vehicle. Meanwhile, a camera from the van's interior showed Cox flying headfirst into the metal divider between the driver's section and the prisoner's area. The man could be heard trying to say, "I can't move, I'm going to die like this." He continued to plead as he struggled to make out the words, "Please, please, please help me." Shortly after, Diaz pulled over and called an ambulance, but told paramedics to meet him at the police station. According to officials, upon the van's arrival at the station, Officer Diaz, Jocelyn Lavandier, Luis Rivera, Betsy Segui, and Ronald Presley dragged Cox out of the vehicle and tried to make him stand, at which point he collapsed to the floor. The officers then placed him in a wheelchair and brought him to a cell where they put him on the floor. As they waited for the ambulance, officers kept ordering Cox to get up or move. They mocked him for being paralyzed, thinking he was inebriated and ignoring the possibility that he might be seriously injured. The victim was later taken to a medical facility and it was determined that he suffered a fractured neck. He was ultimately left paralyzed from the chest down. 3 months later, he sued the 5 officers and the city of New Haven, claiming $100 million in damages. On November the 28th of 2022, the officers in question turned themselves in at the Connecticut State Police Barracks after they were criminally charged with reckless endangerment and cruelty. They were each released on a $25,000 bond and later pleaded not guilty. Presley retired in January of 2023 but was still facing charges. With the police chief's recommendation, the police commissioners voted in favor of the terminations of Lavandier, Rivera, Diaz, and Segui. As of the latest updates, Cox settled his civil suit for $45 million and the charge he was accused of during the arrest had been dropped. Number 8. Melissa Williams. 46-year-old Colorado woman Melissa Williams claimed she'd been forced to resign from her job as a police lieutenant in the Arapahoe County Sheriff's Office after her colleagues discovered her OnlyFans page. Williams had worked in law enforcement for 28 years, and in May of 2020, she began posting her explicit content on the adult platform. She said it was a way of spicing up her marital relations with her husband and a means to unwind from her job as an officer. In August of 2021, Melissa discovered that several of her fellow officers had signed up to her page. Shortly after, her salacious photos circulated around the entire force, including jail staff and her superiors. The situation affected Williams's mental health and forced her into therapy, eventually getting recommended not to return to policing. During her time off, a severance package of $30,000 was put together by her lawyer and the sheriff's office. In the wake of her leaving the force, her online fan base soared from 400 to 4,800. Many of those newly established audiences were dozens of police officers who were leaving Williams messages and asking for a discount and free photos. Williams said that some of those who were asking for free content were the same officers who had circulated her photos at the workplace. Number 7. Erica Rivera. In August of 2014, 27-year-old officer Erica Rivera from the New York Police Department was fired for a Throwback Thursday photo that suggested she once dated a known criminal. Rivera and Danny Perez had dated before the former became a police officer. According to Rivera, she hadn't had any contact with Perez since 2009, after he was arrested for a non-fatal stabbing. In 2012, Rivera posted an Instagram photo of her and Perez, apparently to celebrate Throwback Thursday. During that time, she was already an officer assigned to the 52nd Precinct Station House in the Bronx. On August 17th, Perez's new girlfriend reportedly went to the station and complained about the Instagram photo. Shortly after, the inspector at the station called Rivera and questioned her about the matter. He asked her if she knew that Perez was a criminal and started asking if she was having intercourse with him. Rivera told the inspector she hadn't had any contact with Perez for several years. She also told him that the photo had been taken in 2007. She added that he had no right to ask questions about her private life. Rivera was promptly reported to the Internal Affairs Bureau, at which point she was investigated. There were instances where she'd be trailed while she was off duty. In the spring of 2013, she was again accused of associating with another criminal named George Mann. NYPD officials questioned Rivera regarding the matter and threatened to fire her if she wouldn't say whether she was intimate with Mann or not. Rivera admitted to dating Mann on and off for 3 months, but claimed she was unaware of his criminal history. After the allegations cost her career, she filed a $5 million lawsuit against the city for wrongful termination. Nevertheless, there is no record that we could find that shows her ever receiving anything. Number 6. Taylor Salters. The Athens-Clarke County Police Department fired Officer Taylor Salters after an investigation determined that he'd intentionally run down and hit a fleeing suspect with his police cruiser. Police body-worn camera footage showed Salters pursuing Timmy Patman on June the 1st of 2018 in Athens, Georgia. The 24-year-old was wanted for an active probation violation and tried to flee on foot. Salters initially maneuvered his vehicle in an attempt to block the suspect, but the man dodged. Patman then continued running down the street, at which point Salters hit him with the front right of his police car, causing him to roll up on the hood of the car and subsequently fall to the pavement. Patman was taken into custody after being released from the hospital. In the immediate aftermath, the officer was placed on administrative leave but was fired the next day following an independent investigation. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation and Prosecuting Attorneys Council of Georgia also started looking into the incident and at whether the speedy termination of Salters was rightful. During the course of multiple investigations, Police Chief Scott Freeman was eventually forced to resign in September, effectively for swinging the axe on Salters firing too quickly. The county manager had cited an erosion of confidence from within the police department and community. After the investigation concluded, Salters was exonerated. He then proceeded to sue the city, alleging that the department had rushed to judgment in firing him. In the end, the Athens-Clarke County Unified Government agreed to a $250,000 settlement in March of 2019 to avoid continued litigation. Number 5. Michael McMaster. A viral video caught the moment 30-year-old Georgia man Tyler Lee Canaris was slammed to the ground by a Paulding County Sheriff's deputy as he was being arrested for a crime he didn't commit. Dashcam video of the incident, which transpired at around 6 a.m. on March the 4th of 2022, showed Deputy Michael McMaster responding to a report of a man attempting to break into a vehicle at the Evans Mill subdivision in Dallas. McMaster, who was in his early 30s, encountered Canaris, whom he described as matching the description of a suspect breaking into cars. The deputy approached the man and tried to handcuff him after he allegedly refused to comply with commands. "I'm not breaking into anyone's cars," Canaris said, right before the deputy grabbed him and forcibly brought him to the ground before being placed under arrest. Canaris was then transported to the hospital for medical evaluation. It was determined that he suffered serious injuries to his right clavicle, a skull fracture, ruptured eardrum, and a concussion. He was later diagnosed with a traumatic brain injury. His medical bills would later accumulate to almost $75,000 worth. It was later officially determined that Canaris was not the person who was breaking into cars, but for some odd reason he was still charged with obstruction of justice, even after everything that had transpired. After Paulding County requested the Georgia Bureau of Investigation to look into the incident, McMaster was relieved of his duties as a deputy. Canaris later filed a complaint for damages against McMaster and the Paulding County Sheriff. His attorneys held a news conference in February of 2023, saying that they were pleased that the sheriff's office had finally taken action and fired the deputy. They also said that the criminal charges against their client should be dropped. They further stated that they'd sent an official demand to the county, urging officials to resolve the civil case they had filed. Number 4. Joe Gutierrez. U.S. Army Lieutenant Karen Nazario filed a lawsuit against 2 police officers after he was pepper sprayed, struck, and handcuffed during a traffic stop in Windsor, Virginia. The ordeal took place on the evening of December the 5th of 2020, when Nazario was spotted driving an SUV with an improperly displayed license plate. His car was new at the time, and it only had a cardboard temporary plate taped to the inside of the rear window. 24-year-old Officer Daniel Crocker from the Windsor Police Department attempted to pull him over using blue lights and sirens. Nazario continued to travel at a low rate of speed, and he eventually pulled over near a gas station. Crocker, who was tailing him, had already called for backup. Footage that captured the incident showed Crocker and responding Officer Joe Gutierrez pointing handguns at the uniformed soldier as they approached him at the gas station. In the video, the officers could be heard repeatedly shouting at Nazario, commanding him to exit his vehicle. At one point, Gutierrez was heard yelling that Nazario would be fixing to ride the lightning if he didn't get out. Nazario held his hands in the air outside the driver's side window and continually asked why he was being stopped. When he said he was afraid to get out, Gutierrez told him, "You should be." In spite of Nazario's calm demeanor, Gutierrez went on to pepper spray him through the open window. Once Nazario exited the SUV, the officer told him to get on the ground, with Gutierrez kneeing Nazario in the leg. Crocker searched the vehicle and realized that no violations were committed by Nazario. They then released him without charge. Following an investigation into the encounter, it was determined that Gutierrez had used excessive force during the traffic stop. The 51-year-old was fired in April of 2021. In the same month, the video of the incident went viral after it was publicly released due to the fact that Nazario had sued the officers, seeking $1 million in damages. He was alleging that he'd been illegally searched, assaulted, battered, and falsely imprisoned. In January of 2023, a jury in Richmond found Gutierrez liable for assault and awarded Nazario $2,685 in compensatory damages. The jury also awarded him $1,000 in punitive damages for Crocker's illegal search of Nazario's vehicle. Nazario almost immediately requested a new trial, claiming the jury's verdict was against the clear weight of the evidence, among other grounds. His request was rejected by U.S. District Judge Roderick Young, who stated that the jury was at liberty to weigh the credibility of the evidence. However, Young agreed that Nazario was owed compensatory damages in order to vindicate the soldier's rights under the U.S. Constitution. The judge awarded him $1 in nominal damages. Number 3. Joshua Szabo. In Old Saybrook, Connecticut, a local law enforcement officer was accused of misusing his access to the statewide police information system to obtain the identity of a woman he reportedly wanted to date. Officer Joshua Szabo was working a private duty patrol shift at a local Walmart on November the 25th of 2022, when a woman shopping there caught his attention. When the woman got into her vehicle, the 30-year-old sent a text message to an emergency dispatcher to check the woman's license plate. He told the dispatcher that he was game in for a date. The dispatcher advised Szabo that he'd have to request the information over the radio, so the officer did just that. After getting the woman's name, he looked her up on Instagram. An arrest warrant stated that the radio communication unraveled the date-seeking plot when the fire chief's wife heard the request and recognized the woman's name. When investigators questioned Szabo, he told them that he checked her license plate because the woman was behaving suspiciously at the time. In December, Old Saybrook police charged him with computer crime for illegally accessing the Connecticut Online Law Enforcement Teleprocessing System for personal reasons. 2 months later, police commissioners voted unanimously to fire Szabo in connection with the charge he was facing. Subsequent information indicated that Szabo's request for an accelerated rehabilitation program was granted by a judge. It could potentially dismiss his case, providing that he'd stay out of trouble for at least a year. Number 2. James Hinkle. On December the 13th of 2022, Officer James Hinkle from the Waterbury Police Department in Connecticut berated a driver he'd accused of trying to run him over. Hinkle had been directing traffic when a woman driving an SUV plowed through an intersection despite being directed to stop by the officer. Police body camera footage showed Hinkle catching up to the SUV and demanding the driver to stop. "Pull over, goddammit!" Hinkle shouted. Once the woman was in the parking lot, the officer lashed out at her as she profusely apologized. In the video, he could be heard shouting, "You're lucky you're not in handcuffs right this second." Throughout the interaction, the driver was interrupted by Hinkle as she tried to explain herself. At one point, the officer told her it wasn't an accident but an act of being irresponsible. Despite Hinkle's conduct, which Waterbury Police Chief Fernando Spagnuolo described as unacceptable, the woman continued to apologize. When another officer with the department arrived at the scene, he asked Hinkle if he was hurt, to which the enraged officer replied, "Emotionally." According to Spagnuolo, the driver was given a ticket, which was later dropped. Following the incident, an internal affairs investigation determined that Hinkle's actions and behavior were in violation of departmental policies. His employment with the police department was terminated on January the 11th of 2023. Number 1. Michael Oxford. A viral TikTok video with millions of views posted in August of 2020 showed how a police officer used a taser to arrest 22-year-old Kindesia Smith in Loganville, Florida. Smith and Itra Thomas had allegedly been involved in an altercation with a neighbor and her child. On August the 18th, police were called to the area by the neighbor, who claimed that Thomas had thrown a bottle at her car and threatened her son. The neighbor pointed responding officer Michael Oxford towards a residence where Thomas could be located. Oxford went there and approached a group of women, including Thomas and Smith, who were gathered on the porch. He tried to investigate by speaking with the former, but the latter began yelling at him. The officer warned Smith that she could go to jail for obstructing his investigation. Smith replied, saying, "I'm not going anywhere." She yelled at the officer, telling him that he was on their property. Oxford then told her that she was under arrest, causing her to start distancing herself from the officer. At that point, the officer lunged forward and tried to put her under arrest. The woman resisted and Oxford tased her. Smith promptly fell to the ground onto a patch of bushes beside the porch. The officer instructed her to put her hands behind her back several times before saying, "I will tase you again." Toward the end of the video, Oxford could be seen forcing Smith to turn over and trying to cuff her as she lay on the ground. Smith was taken to the Gwinnett County Jail on charges of felony obstruction and simple battery against an officer. The following day, she was released after posting a $2,950 bond. In the immediate aftermath, the Gwinnett County Police Department investigated the incident and subsequently fired the officer. They released a statement saying that even though there had been probable cause to arrest Smith for obstruction of an officer, Oxford didn't meet the department's core values. The entire incident led to a civil rights lawsuit against Oxford and Gwinnett County, filed by Smith in May of 2022. Records indicate that the suit was dismissed with prejudice in August of 2023. Chicago area woman Dana Holmes was pulled over and arrested by law enforcement in LaSalle County in May of 2013 after her blood alcohol content was found to be 3 times over the legal limit. She was taken to a local jail where surveillance footage would show a group of deputies, 3 men and 1 woman, carrying Holmes into a cell and forcibly stripping her naked. A deputy later threw a stack of blankets and what the authorities described as a padded suit into the cell. The cops would deny any wrongdoing and claimed that Holmes was combative during the booking process. Footage leading up to her being stripped would show the woman, at the time in her early 30s, being searched against the wall and moving her leg. The deputies would claim that she kicked them, but she denied doing so. As dictated by Illinois law at the time, strip searches were only allowed if officers had reasonable belief that the inmate was concealing a weapon or controlled substance. It didn't, however, cover situations where they were uncooperative during the booking process, and the officer's responsibility was to place them in a cell without items that they could use to potentially self-harm. In the fall of 2013, Holmes sued LaSalle County authorities alleging that she'd suffered emotional harm and that her civil rights had been violated
escalated by the search, which she claimed had been conducted without any legal justification. In the spring of 2014, the county agreed to pay $355,000 in legal fees and settlement costs. The authorities also stated that they'd planned to implement new policies that would make forcible removal of an inmate's clothing allowed to occur only as a last resort. Further policy updates stated that the process would be video documented and accompanied by supervisory oversight and detailed reports. Number 8. Antonio Arnello Smith. In June of 2020, Georgia man Antonio Arnello Smith filed a lawsuit against the Valdosta Police Department, alleging that its officers had used excessive force in arresting him after he'd been mistaken for a panhandling suspect. As reported by the Valdosta Daily Times, the officers answered a report of panhandling outside a pharmacy on North Ashley Street, but were given no information regarding the physical appearance of the man involved. The incident began when a single officer approached 46-year-old Smith and questioned him as a possible suspect. The man claimed that he'd returned from a business up the road where he'd received a money wire from his sister, adding that his presence there could be verified by surveillance cameras. He complied when asked to present a form of identification. A sergeant and 2 more cops then arrived at the scene. The sergeant rushed Smith without announcing that he was under arrest. He bear-hugged the man and slammed him to the ground. The officer's body cam would record Smith screaming, "Oh my God, what are you doing? What are you doing? Jesus!" The other 2 cops assisted in the arrest and held Smith down. The sergeant tried to handcuff him and forced his wrist until it broke. Officers then seemingly realized that the man had been injured, so they told him to relax as they removed his restraints. They then rolled Smith over and alerted the emergency services. The sergeant then asked the officer who'd initially interacted with Smith if he was the panhandling suspect, but he replied negatively, saying that he'd just stopped to talk to him. Smith refused medical treatment, and recalling the incident, the sergeant would later state, "He was not angry with us, but he just wanted to go." Smith's attorney later filed a lawsuit against the officers involved in the arrest, as well as against the Valdosta police chief, mayor, and members of city council on grounds of conspiracy to create a false report, excessive force, false detention, false arrest, and assault and battery. In June of the following year, Valdosta city officials offered Smith a $350,000 legal settlement. Number 7. Amanda Houghton. On July the 25th of 2016, Amanda Houghton called the police in Layton City, Utah, after her car was struck from behind by another vehicle at a stop sign at Fort Lane and Antelope Drive. The collision was hard enough that Houghton's airbags were deployed. She was still reeling from the crash when she was interviewed by 2 responding officers. Their interaction was captured on dash camera video. Houghton was reportedly shocked that the officers were focusing their suspicions on her and not the driver who just hit her. The men were captured saying that she was acting weird and that her answers to their questions were sassy and full of energy. Even though Houghton didn't smell of alcohol or exhibited other concrete signs of impairment, she was asked to perform a field sobriety test. When an officer pointed out that her balance was poor, the woman indicated that it was due to the fact that she'd been in an accident, stating, "Because I'm in shock, I'm shaking." An officer was then seen reaching around Houghton from behind and feeling between her breasts, grabbing her arm and pulling her back when she shied away. The officer hadn't announced the search and Houghton accused him of groping her, but he maintained that he was allowed to pat her down. Houghton was subsequently arrested for DUI and interference with an arresting officer. A toxicology evaluation would later reveal that she was completely clean of drugs and alcohol. Through her attorney, she offered a proposal for a $50,000 out-of-court settlement to the department in the fall of 2016, threatening to sue if it wasn't accepted. The proposal went unanswered, thus Houghton followed through on her lawsuit. Its outcome remained unclear, but by December of 2016, the DUI charges against the woman had been dropped. Number 6. Brady Mystic. On September the 17th of 2019, Brady Mystic had just pulled up into the parking lot of a laundromat in Idaho Springs, Colorado. when he saw the flashing lights of a police vehicle behind him. Mystic had allegedly run a stop sign, but he was reportedly unaware of that aspect and didn't know that the police were there for him. He was a deaf man who couldn't read lips and was only able to form a few words verbally. He primarily relied on American Sign Language to communicate. He got out of his vehicle and began to walk towards the laundromat building. Mystic was then charged by officers Nicholas Hannin and Ellie Summers without warning or attempt to communicate, as a lawsuit would later allege. Hannin reportedly initiated the confrontation by shouting at Mystic, "Just who do you think you are?" before he started pulling on the man's shirt. Mystic, who couldn't hear the officers' commands, reportedly gestured to them in an attempt to express his confusion, but it was to no avail. Hannin and Summers took him down and were shown on body cam footage slamming his head into the concrete and using a taser on him. Following his violent arrest, Mystic was jailed for 4 months on charges of resisting arrest and second-degree assault on a police officer. The charges were eventually dismissed and he was released. Updates from the fall of 2021 indicated that Mystic had filed a lawsuit against Hannin and Summers, the City of Idaho Springs, and the Clear Creek County Board of Commissioners, seeking unspecified compensation for the pain and suffering he'd experienced during the arrest and due to his incarceration. Updates also indicated that Summers had remained on active duty while Hannin had been fired from the department in July of 2021 in connection with another violent arrest. Number 5. Tiffany McNeil. On July the 24th of 2017, the husband of Michigan woman Tiffany McNeil called the Coldwater Police Department to report that they'd been fighting while McNeil was intoxicated. The woman was taken into custody and video surveillance would show her being held against a wall in an area of the Branch County Jail by Officer Louis Eastmead. 5 other officers were present at the scene. The footage showed Eastmead suddenly grabbing a handcuffed McNeil by the hair, turning abruptly and slamming her head first into the concrete. The 31-year-old woman became unconscious and blood started pooling around her head. Eastmead was seen reportedly pushing his knee into her unconscious body in the immediate aftermath. McNeil was taken to hospital where she required 20 stitches for injuries to her face and where staff also determined she'd suffered a concussion. McNeil had no memory of the incident but described the aftermath by saying, "My hair was full of blood. My face was unrecognizable. It was completely swollen and black." The woman's injuries were also visible in her mugshot. She only realized what had happened to her after watching the surveillance clip, which was released and viewed millions of times across social media in the incident's wake. McNeil was charged with domestic violence and resisting arrest but only pleaded guilty to the former. Eastmead would justify his actions by saying that McNeil had become combative during the arrest. He claimed that she'd pushed herself off the wall and thrown her body at him, and that they ended up on the ground because he was unable to support her weight. McNeil subsequently filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against the city of Coldwater, the Coldwater Police Department, Officer Eastmead, as well as the other officers present. She alleged that Eastmead had used excessive force against her and that the other officers had lied in their reports to support the false notion that she'd resisted arrest. Eastmead was fired from the department after the lawsuit was filed in the fall of 2019. The matter was settled for an undisclosed amount. Number 4. William Sidney Blevins. William Sidney Blevins and his girlfriend, Amanda Woods, were driving from Leesburg to Center in Alabama to meet a friend on January the 24th of 2023. The couple were pulled over by Officer Michael Andrew Kilgore, aged 39, who justified the decision by telling Blevins that his tag light was out. Kilgore asked to perform a search, but Blevins refused, at which point the officer demanded he and Woods step out of the car. He placed both of them in handcuffs. Kilgore then called Officer Shane Butler from the Cedar Bluff Police Department, who arrived at the scene with a K-9 unit. He approached the vehicle and ducked down by its passenger side, out of the couple's view. Butler then went to get the police dog, which subsequently jumped into the vehicle's passenger seat. Kilgore searched the car and produced a bag of methamphetamine, which he claimed to have found inside, but which Blevins would maintain he'd never seen before. The latter was arrested for drug possession and taken to the Cherokee County Jail, where he remained until the following afternoon. At the time, Kilgore had been employed by Center Police for less than a year, and the department began reporting a significant number of arrests, many of them drug-related, within months of him joining the force. A few days after Blevins' arrest, a confidential informant told the police that Kilgore was planting drugs on drivers, possibly as a way of boosting up his arrest record and facilitating his rise through the ranks. Following an investigation, Kilgore was arrested on May 3rd of 2023 for criminal conspiracy to commit a controlled substance crime distribution. Center Police Chief Kirk Blankenship told the media in a public statement, "There is no excuse for any officer violating the law like this." The charges against Blevins and other drivers were dismissed in the wake of Kilgore's arrest and the discovery of his schemes. Blevins filed a lawsuit against Kilgore, also naming Butler, on the basis of wrongful arrest and malicious prosecution. The suit mentioned that he'd suffered a shoulder injury after being forced to sleep on the jail's concrete floor, and that his name, mugshot, and charges had been published in the local paper. Number 3. Nicole Harper. On July the 9th of 2020, Nicole Harper was signaled to pull over by an Arkansas state trooper on US Highway 167 in Jacksonville after she was clocked at 84 miles per hour in a 60 mile per hour zone. Harper, who was pregnant at the time, reduced her speed, then activated her blinker and emergency lights as she was searching for a place where to pull over safely. She reportedly considered that there wasn't enough space on the nearest shoulder. After following Harper for about 2 minutes, Trooper Rodney Dun initiated a pursuit intervention technique, or PIT. He struck Harper's car from behind, which sent it careening across lanes and into a concrete barrier before the vehicle flipped on its side. The vehicle's airbags were deployed and it started smoking. Harper was reported to have suffered serious body injuries, but her unborn baby wasn't hurt. As Dunn helped the woman out of the vehicle, he asked her why she hadn't pulled over when he signaled her. Harper told him that she thought it would have been safer to wait for the exit, to which Dunn replied, "No, ma'am, you should pull over when law enforcement stops you." The Arkansas driver's license manual instructed drivers to pull to the nearest, safest spot out of the traffic lane. Harper was arrested on charges of speeding and failing to yield to an emergency vehicle. She subsequently sued Dunn in Pulaski County Circuit Court, alleging he had negligently used a pit maneuver against her. The matter was settled in the fall of 2021, with the agreement including a modest financial component, in addition to Arkansas State Police agreeing to policy changes and updated guidelines in its use of pit maneuvers. The update advised officers to only apply it when they believed it was objectively reasonable to protect a third person or an officer from imminent death or serious injury, or when the officer objectively believed other exigent circumstances existed. Number 2. Samuel Scott Jr. On June the 1st of 2018, a Florida man was taken into the custody of the Miami Police Department for what the media would later jokingly describe as him stealing his own car. Samuel Scott Jr., who was at the time in his early 40s, called 911 to report that his 2006 black Jeep Compass had been stolen from outside his aunt's house in Buena Vista. Roughly half an hour later, Scott was handcuffed by 5 police officers who'd mistaken him for the perpetrator, as he reportedly matched the description as a black male, bald, about 6 feet 2 inches, and heavy-set with a white tank top. When Scott insisted that they got the wrong person, an officer told him, "The description of the guy who took off in your car is just like yours," to which Scott replied, "But that's half of Miami." Surveillance footage from the scene would later show the man laughing by himself and saying, "I mean, why would I call the police?" He was arrested on charges of leaving the scene of an accident, false reporting of a crime, failure to carry a concealed weapon license, and possession of marijuana. All the charges were ultimately dropped. 3 years after the incident, Scott filed a lawsuit against the city of Miami and the 5 arresting officers, seeking $500,000 in damages. He alleged that he was unlawfully searched, wrongly imprisoned, and racially profiled. Number 1. Carolyn O'Neill. Deputies in Fremont County, Colorado, was sent to a sober living facility in Canyon City in May of 2014 after being asked by management to perform a welfare check on Carolyn O'Neill. There were reportedly concerns that she was going to harm herself as she'd been struggling with depression, in large part due to the fact that her mother was dying. 3 male officers went to O'Neill's apartment. The woman told them through the door that she wasn't going to hurt herself and that she was naked while preparing a bath. The police nevertheless obtained a key and entered her apartment. They threw O'Neill on the bed while she was still nude and took her into custody. At the local jail, she was placed in a restraint chair for several hours and was forced to wear a spit mask. Officers used a taser on the woman 2 times while she was restrained as she protested the arrest. A judge subsequently dismissed the resisting arrest and disorderly conduct charges that O'Neill faced. The woman filed a wrongful arrest lawsuit against the Fremont County Sheriff's Office, and in the winter of 2020, the suit was settled for $2.4 million. In the spring of 2021, a pair of police officers from the NYPD's 106th precinct in Ozone Park became ensnared in an internal sting operation that ultimately lost them their jobs. Officer Michael Sardoni initially became the target of an investigation in February of that same year. An undercover officer reportedly approached him under the pretense that she was a high-end escort. She asked if Sardoni would be willing to drive her and some other women to their various meetups that night, as their regular driver was supposedly sick. The officer agreed to provide the escorts with transportation for $1,000 in payment. Sardoni also indicated that one of his colleagues, Officer Thomas Diorio, would be willing to assist them as well. On 3 separate occasions in April and May, Diorio and Sardoni allegedly met the escorts in the parking lot of a local diner before driving them to and from hotels in Manhattan and Queens, receiving multiple thousands of dollars for their service. On an evening in mid-May, the 2 officers were told by one of the women that they might need to come up to the room to defend her in case things went awry. Diorio and Sardoni reportedly agreed to the plan. Shortly thereafter, the cops received a text message indicating the woman's client was refusing to pay. They went up to the room to sort things out, and the uncooperative client ultimately acquiesced because he thought Diorio looked like a tough guy. One of the women then took several baggies which she identified as coke into the car with the policeman. Sardoni, who was once named Cop of the Month back in 2015, retired from his position when the details of his misconduct came to light. Diorio meanwhile faced a disciplinary hearing which culminated in his dismissal from the force. Number 6. Zoe Phillips and Andrew Perry. In September of 2020, a disciplinary hearing was held in connection with the alleged misconduct of 2 officers from the Gwent police force in Caerphilly, Wales. 32-year-old Zoe Phillips, a school liaison officer, and 35-year-old Andrew Perry, a traffic specialist, were accused of repeatedly engaging in intimate activities while on duty. The 2 police constables' physical relationship reportedly began in early 2018. On a number of occasions thereafter, Phillips, a mother of 1, and Perry, a married father of 3, met up for secret trysts on company time. They would drive separately to an agreed-upon location, often somewhere remote, where they would have relations with one another inside police vehicles. During the resulting hearing, a panel heard that Phillips and Perry had their ability to respond to emergency calls severely inhibited by their remote rendezvous. An anonymous tipster informed the constable's superiors of their affair, leading to an internal investigation into the matter. After their misconduct had come to light, Phillips and Perry resigned from the force. The disciplinary panel ultimately ruled that the pair's actions amounted to gross misconduct and consequently barred them from serving in law enforcement positions in the future. Number 5. Michael Cheff. The ringleader of a so-called robbery squad within the Paterson Police Department in New Jersey ended up receiving a multi-year prison sentence for the crimes he committed on the force. Michael Cheff, at the time in his late 40s, was a Paterson police sergeant who'd been on the job since 1996. He reportedly oversaw a group of officers who routinely violated the rights of citizens and robbed them under the guise of police procedure. As was detailed in court, Cheff's robbery squad would often stop and search vehicles without any justification before stealing cash and other valuables from the occupants. The corrupt officers would also seize money from random people on the street or in buildings around Paterson.
The illegal activities continued without any suspicions being raised within the department because of Sergeant Chef's willingness to cover for his subordinates. Chef would submit inaccurate police reports that omitted or falsified the officer's actions. For his role in covering up the scheme, the man would receive a portion of the money stolen from innocent people. On November the 14th of 2017, Chef personally joined 3 members of the robbery squad for an illegal seizure. The officers arrested an individual before going to their apartment and fraudulently obtaining a consent to search form by lying to the individual's mother. When the policeman rummaged through the apartment, the arrestee was left handcuffed in the patrol car. Chef allegedly pilfered money and narcotics from a safe inside the residence. An internal investigation eventually led to the discovery of the robbery squad's activities. Chef was consequently charged with conspiracy to deprive persons of civil rights and falsification of a police report, of which he was ultimately found guilty. The other members of the robbery squad were identified as Yudy Ramos, Daniel Pent, Jonathan Bustios, Matthew Torres, and Frank Toledo. They were each arrested and later entered guilty pleas. In September of 2022, Chef was sentenced to 33 months behind bars for his crimes. Number 4. Caitlin Howarth. 21-year-old Caitlin Howarth, a West Yorkshire police constable, was suspended in November of 2021 following the emergence of allegations that she had an affair with her married commanding officer, Chief Superintendent Daniel Greenwood, aged 38. The latter was likewise suspended, pending the findings of an investigation by West Yorkshire Police's Professional Standards Directorate. At the time, Howarth was reportedly working as a probationary officer. Anti-corruption detectives began investigating her after it surfaced that she'd previously dated a drug kingpin, now behind bars for dealing heroin. The young constable's family challenged reports that she was seriously involved with the criminal, claiming she'd only gone on one date with him. Howarth's uncle, Michael Chapman, told the press that she had no knowledge of the man's criminal activities during the course of their brief involvement. Nevertheless, her fling with the unnamed heroin dealer ultimately shed light on her affair with Chief Superintendent Greenwood as well. Updates provided in January of 2023 indicated that internal investigators from the West Yorkshire Police Force were still looking into Howard's relationship with her superior. Number 3. Rebecca Swanston. English policewoman Rebecca Swanston from Portsmouth, Hampshire, was dismissed from the force in November of 2012. The 28-year-old, it emerged, had been engaged in intimate relationships with suspected and known criminals in Southampton. An internal investigation found that Swanston had accessed intelligence from police information systems while based at Southampton Central Police Station. She then used that information to advise criminal associates about their notoriety and police tactics, thereby allowing them to avoid detection. It was later reported that at least 2 men had confided in Swanston about their criminal activities, including a machete attack, but she allegedly neglected to pass the information along to her colleagues. The accusations against Swanston had far-reaching consequences that extended beyond the termination of her career in law enforcement. The revelation of her corrupt activities reportedly led to a case against 2 suspected drug dealers being thrown out because her evidence had served as a key part of the prosecution's case. One of the dealers then went on to supply drugs to an individual who died after taking them. Swanston was fired after incriminating conversations with criminal associates were covertly recorded in her home. At Winchester Crown Court, she pleaded guilty to 3 counts of misconduct in a public office between January and October of 2012 and was consequently jailed for 3 years. Number 2. Shonton Harris, Kelvin Harris, and James Archibald. On October the 23rd of 2018, Florida officials announced that a trio of Miami police officers were facing federal narcotics charges after a citizen's complaint led to an FBI and internal affairs investigation. The corrupt cops were identified as Shonton Harris and Kelvin Harris, of no relation, as well as James Archibald. The officers allegedly took part in an elaborate scheme to shield money launderers and drug traffickers from law enforcement scrutiny in exchange for cash, providing them with protection and transportation. Additionally, Shonton Harris was accused of both using and distributing illicit substances. She was said to have rigged the drug testing system so that she would be able to provide a clear sample in the event that the department requested her to be tested. She also allegedly sold a City of Miami police uniform and badge to an undercover investigator for $1,500, believing the disguise would be used by a hitman to kill someone on behalf of a drug dealer. In a press conference, U.S. Attorney Ariana Fajardo-Orshan heavily criticized the officers' actions, saying they'd committed the very crimes that they have a duty to investigate, to report, and to help prosecute. Orshan went on to detail that Shonton Harris had received $17,000 for providing police protection to criminals, while Kelvin Harris received $10,000 and Archibald received $6,500. The three accused officers were charged with conspiracy to possess cocaine with the intent to distribute, attempted to possess cocaine with intent to distribute, and using a firearm during and in relation to a drug trafficking crime. They were each held in custody on $200,000 bonds. In April of 2019, a Justice Department press release revealed that Shonton Harris had been sentenced to 15.5 years in prison after reaching a plea deal with prosecutors. Kelvin Harris and Archibald brought their cases to trial, where they were both ultimately convicted. Harris received a prison term of 27.5 years, while Archibald was ordered to spend 10 years behind bars. Number 1. Gerald Goins. In January of 2019, Officer Gerald Goins from the Houston Police Department attempted to obtain a no-knock search warrant for a residence on Hardin Street in the Pecan Park area of the city's East End district. The department had received a tip from a local resident that Dennis Wayne Tuttle and Regina Ann Nicholas, who lived together at the home in question, were in possession of illegal drugs and machine guns. As it would later emerge, the tipster was actually just a disgruntled next-door neighbor who'd fabricated the allegations in retaliation for past disagreements with Tuttle and Nicholas. Nevertheless, Officer Goins pushed hard for the no-knock warrant, even going so far as to lie about having a confidential informant who could verify the accusations. After securing the warrant, Goins arranged the heavily armed and high-stakes Hardin Street raid for January the 28th. Upon entering the home, officers gunned down the couple's dog before fatally shooting both Tuttle and Nicholas as well. There were no drugs or weapons found at the residence. In the aftermath, Officer Goins and other members of the Houston Police Department faced heavy backlash for the raid, with the Houston Chronicle describing the incident as one of the worst scandals to hit the HPD in years. During the summer of 2019, a grand jury indicted Goins on 2 counts of felony murder, as well as counts of making false statements and depriving the victim's constitutional right to be secure against unreasonable searches. As a direct result of the controversy, Houston police conducted a systematic review of approximately 14,000 cases, which had been handled by the officers in Goins' unit. Houston man Frederick Jeffrey had previously been sentenced to 25 years behind bars for possessing 5 grams of methamphetamine. Following the Hardin Street raid fiasco, Jeffrey was released from prison after it was determined that Goins had falsified evidence and perjured himself to secure a conviction in the case. A 24-year-old police officer from DeKalb County, Georgia, was arrested and criminally charged for posting nude photos of a colleague on social media. The situation came to light following the release of a police report in January of 2017. The officer in question was identified as Audrey Franceschini, who was described as an acquaintance of the unnamed victim. Investigators said the latter was notified of the explicit images publication by concerned friends. The motive for Franceschini's actions was unclear, as she, as the victim, reportedly had friendly interactions as recently as a few days before the photos were posted. It's believed that the young officer had her colleagues' social media accounts to gain access to the pictures on her phone. After uploading the materials for the public to see, Franceschini sent the victim threatening messages, allegedly saying, "You're going to learn." As a consequence, she was taken into police custody on charges of invasion of privacy by computer trespassing, and explicit transmissions. Although she was placed on administrative leave at the onset of the investigation, Franceschini was eventually terminated from the force, after which she moved to Florida. The young woman resurfaced in national headlines in May of 2021 when she was accused of sneaking into a Hialeah high school and passing out flyers bearing her Instagram handle to students. The bizarre incident, which landed the 28-year-old back in custody, had apparently been hatched as a ploy for her to grow her social media following. Number 24. James Matt French. Early on the morning of March the 12th of 2023,
Oklahoma City police observed an SUV speeding and swerving along South May Avenue. An officer caught up with the vehicle after it pulled into a private driveway on Southwest Grand Boulevard. In body cam footage from the traffic stop, the motorist, identified as James Matt French, was asked if he'd been drinking. He neglected to answer the question, instead asserting, "I'm a captain on the police department." Subsequent reports confirmed French's claim, mentioning that he worked as part of the OKCPD's Investigations Bureau. When asked again if he'd been drinking that night, the man hesitated before motioning towards his chest and asking the officer to turn off his body cam in a whispering tone of voice. The officer declined, stating, "I'm not turning my camera off. You've got to be kidding me." French eventually stepped out of his unmarked, city-owned SUV and admitted to drinking 3 or 4 beers during a poker game that evening. The officer then asked the inebriated police captain if he thought he should be driving in his impaired state. French said, "No, but I came from 4 blocks." After failing field sobriety tests, French continued pleading with the officer to turn off his body camera again, reiterating that he was a captain with the police department. The officer rejected him time and again, eventually saying, "I'm a sergeant. I've taken an oath to uphold the law. I don't care if you're a gangbanger or the president of the United States." The captain was ultimately taken into custody and booked at the Oklahoma County Detention Center on a DUI. 55-year-old French, who'd been with the department for 32 years, was placed on administrative leave, pending an internal investigation into his actions. Number 23. Christopher Lofton. In the aftermath of the horrific Robb Elementary School shooting in May of 2022, the Brazoria County Sheriff's Office in Texas dispatched a team of 8 patrol deputies and 2 dispatchers to the city of Uvalde in order to assist local agencies. One of the officers assigned to the relief effort was Deputy Christopher Lofton, a 2-year veteran of the force. On June the 2nd, a few days after arriving in Uvalde, Lofton reportedly got intoxicated to the point that he was a danger to himself and others while he was off duty at the officer's temporary living quarters. He was immediately removed from the assignment and arrested for public intoxication. Having violated multiple department policies, Lofton was promptly terminated from his position with the Brazoria County Sheriff's Office. Number 22. Emily Garcia. Shortly before 4:30 a.m. on August the 3rd of 2022, Miami police were called to the home of a South Florida cop's significant other for a report of a domestic disturbance. El Portal Police Corporal Emily Garcia and her boyfriend, who was also identified as a police officer, had returned home from a night out at a Flanagan's Seafood Bar and Grill, where they drank multiple alcoholic beverages. They'd subsequently gone to sleep, but the unnamed boyfriend later awoke to find Garcia slapping him and biting his chest. He shoved her away, causing her upper lip to bruise. After law enforcement arrived, Garcia was taken into custody on a charge of simple battery. El Portal's police chief verified in the aftermath that the incident took place while the corporal was off duty. She was consequently relieved of her police powers with pay pending an official investigation. Garcia's boyfriend told a judge that he wasn't afraid of her and didn't wish for her to be issued a stay-away order. A modified order was ultimately imposed, allowing Garcia to have contact with her partner as long as she wasn't physically threatening. The terms of the order also stipulated that she could not engage in criminal activity or possess a firearm. Number 21. Brian R. Tejera. Early on August the 24th of 2021, a pair of uniformed police officers were parked in the lot located at 501 South Pinellas Avenue in Tarpon Springs, Florida. Shortly after 1 a.m., a vehicle pulled into the parking lot and came to a halt near one of the officers. The driver, identified as 37-year-old Brian R. Tejera, was acting strangely and made what were described as unusual and erratic statements. One of the officers at the scene later reported hearing what he believed to be a semi-automatic handgun slide being manipulated. When confronted, Tejera voluntarily exited his vehicle to speak with the policeman, who subsequently confirmed that a handgun was inside the car and that a magazine had been removed. It emerged during their conversation with Tejera that he was an off-duty Clearwater police officer. A patrol supervisor was called to the scene, whereupon it was determined that the man was under the influence of alcohol. At some point, Tahira allegedly became aggressive towards the officers, but was ultimately arrested without the use of force. He was reportedly taken to the Pinellas County Jail and booked on a DUI. Number 20. Courtney Brown and Christy Wilson. Georgia woman Sarah Webb was late for her job at a nail salon when she was pulled over in the city of Roswell for allegedly speeding on April the 7th of 2018. The officers who initiated the stop, identified as Courtney Brown and Christy Wilson, were seemingly unfazed by the presence of their body cameras and proceeded to joke around about the motorist's fate. In footage of the cops' interaction, Officer Brown could be heard admitting she didn't actually have speed detection equipment before pulling out her phone and opening a coin flip app. Officer Wilson proposed that if the virtual coin landed on heads, they'd arrest Webb, despite not having any evidence that she'd broken the law. If the coin fell tails up, the officers said they'd let her go. The coin subsequently landed on tails, but Brown and Wilson decided to make the unlawful arrest regardless, making a joke in reference to Michael Jordan and his number 23, which is the police's code for arrest. Webb was tearful as the officers placed her in handcuffs and stuffed her in the back of their squad car. A couple months then passed before Brown and Wilson's illegal coin flip arrest came to light. Webb would later reveal that she didn't know anything about the situation until a local media outlet reached out to her with the body cam footage 3 weeks before her scheduled court date. In July of 2018, the woman had her speeding charges dropped, and Roswell's police chief released a letter reprimanding the officers' actions and notifying the public of their termination. The chief said that Brown and Wilson had violated 2 of the department's human resources policies by failing to perform at an acceptable level, stating that using a coin flip to determine one's freedom was not police procedure. Number 19. Dennis Folia. A fight broke out at Spectrum Lounge on Baltimore Avenue in Beltsville, Maryland, in the early hours of May the 6th of 2022. At around 2:30 a.m., a heated dispute between 2 female patrons over a missing passport prompted the intervention of a bar security guard, later identified as Mohammed Cisse. After the latter tried to stop one of the women as she was causing damage to the lounge, her boyfriend got involved. Dennis Folia, an off-duty DC police officer, placed Cisse in a chokehold and threatened his life, pointing a firearm at his torso. Cisse indicated he couldn't breathe and subsequently began recording the altercation. In the resulting video, Folia was shown with a police badge hanging around his neck and a gun in hand as he continued berating the security guard. Prince George's County Police responded to the scene, whereupon Folia was arrested on charges of first and second degree assault, as well as use of a firearm in a violent crime. The department issued Glock he had in his possession that night reportedly had 15 bullets in the magazine and 1 in the chamber. The following week, Folia was placed on no contact status, while the DC police chief recommended he be given an indefinite suspension. Number 18. Adam Becker. In April of 2023, an officer with the Abilene Police Department in Texas was arrested for pressuring a teen to eat a THC edible while he was off duty. The suspect was identified as Adam Becker, who'd allegedly given his child's babysitter 2 pieces of chocolate containing the psychoactive substance. The unnamed teenager later told law enforcement that she felt pressured by Becker to eat one of the edibles but saved the second one. Investigators from the Texas Department of Public Safety were able to analyze the chocolate and subsequently confirmed the presence of THC. The officer reportedly turned himself into the Jones County Sheriff's Office and resigned from the force. Number 17. Christina Guess. In July of 2022, a former Florida corrections officer was arrested for running an illicit drug trafficking ring. The deputy chief of the Volusia County Sheriff's Office revealed that the suspect, Deland resident Christina Guess, had previously worked in the Florida prison system for 12 years, but was busted for a similar drug dealing operation and ended up spending roughly 6 months behind bars. Following her release, the trafficking resumed. In March of 2021, a multi-jurisdictional investigation was opened into the drug ring headed up by Guess and supplied by 26-year-old Rashad Maurice Campbell. The large-scale operation was reportedly responsible for smuggling 24 pounds of uncut methamphetamine into the U.S. from Mexico. The deputy chief indicated that those 24 uncut pounds could amount to as many as 80 to 100 pounds when diluted for distribution on the street level. A search warrant was executed at Guess's residence, where authorities seized 1.4 pounds of meth, 348 grams of cocaine, and 11 hydrocodone pills. One of the former officer's co-conspirators, 34-year-old Andrea Ilian Dunmeyer, was also taken into custody. She'd already been actively under investigation following the death of her child, who ingested a lethal dose of methamphetamine in December of 2021. Number 16. Michael Martinez. Phoenix police interviewed one of their own officers named as Michael Martinez in connection with the solicitation of an escort in October of 2022. The 30-year-old officer was arrested on the morning of the 16th, exactly 1 month after investigators said he met up with a woman he'd found on a website as well as her friend. There were messages found on Martinez's phone in which he and one of the women engaged in detailed discussions of various intimate acts. While being interviewed, the officer admitted to paying the escort $100 on the day in question before having intercourse with her friend. According to court documents, Martinez attempted to downplay the seriousness of his actions, claiming that the encounter didn't actually break any laws regarding commercial intimacy. His colleagues at the Phoenix Police Department didn't share his view of the situation. He was arrested and initially assigned to his house while an administrative investigation got underway. However, within a few days, Martinez had resigned from the department. Number 15. Angel Poncetti and Gregory Epley Jr. In October of 2016, a man accompanied by his girlfriend broke into his estranged wife's house in Aubrey, Texas, making off with several items including her marriage license, 3 birth certificates, and 4 social security cards. The suspect involved was Dallas Police Sergeant Gregory Epley Jr., who was in the midst of a contentious divorce-related dispute with his former partner, Anna. Following their separation, the woman alleged that Epley had started posting ominous, frightening messages to social media and had bought a pocket knife, which he had shipped to her home. On the night of the break-in, Epley had been aided by one of his colleagues with the Dallas Police Department, a third-year officer by the name of Angel Poncetti. Although the situation brewed without any further developments for several months, both Epley and Poncetti ultimately turned themselves into the police in April of 2017 after warrants were issued for their arrest. The latter was charged with burglary of a habitation, while Epley was also hit with a count of stalking. Number 14. Joseph Reed Copeland. On September the 6th of 2022, an officer from the Denham Springs Police Department in Louisiana was arrested in Texas on an outstanding warrant for crimes against the juvenile. 30-year-old Joseph Reed Copeland was booked into jail in Irving before being extradited to Livingston Parish to face charges of felony carnal knowledge of a juvenile and malfeasance in office. An internal investigation into Copeland was opened after the Livingston Parish Sheriff's Office received a tip from a mandated reporter about an inappropriate relationship he was having with a minor. Law enforcement learned that the officer had met up with the victim in a parking lot and also communicated with them via Snapchat and Instagram. Copeland resigned from the force following the start of the investigation and subsequently traveled to Texas. When the arrest warrant was issued, he was tracked down by the Louisiana State Police Fugitive Task Force and Irving Police Department Fugitive Unit. In January of 2023, Copeland pleaded guilty to his crimes and was given a pair of suspended prison sentences. He was also placed on probation for 3 years in order to register as an offender for 15 years. Number 13. Joshua Charlton. An officer from the Chillicothe Police Department in Missouri was arrested by Highway Patrol in Livingston County on the night of August 26th of 2022. Law enforcement records indicated that 24-year-old Joshua Charlton had been wanted on a felony warrant in connection with an altercation involving his live-in partner. He was accused of striking the unnamed woman with a closed fist during an argument at their residence. Charlton was booked at the Grundy County Detention Center on a third-degree domestic assault charge before being released on his own recognizance. The officer was ordered not to have any contact with the victim nor possess firearms while the case was pending.
Records from the University of Central Missouri website show that Charlton had been among 25 graduates from the Central Missouri Police Academy at Warrensburg in June of 2021. Number 12. Maricela Cabello. At around 1:30 a.m. on August the 20th of 2021, the North Carolina State Highway Patrol initiated a traffic stop near downtown Raleigh at the intersection of Peace Street and Capitol Boulevard. The car that was pulled over was reportedly being operated by Maricela Cabello, an officer with the Wilson Police Department. The 26-year-old was at the time off duty and driving her personal vehicle. Law enforcement determined that Cabello was intoxicated and consequently arrested her on a DWI charge. A Wilson news release revealed that the young woman had been a police officer for about a year and was assigned to the patrol division when her arrest occurred. She was placed on administrative leave while the matter was investigated. Number 11. Diane Ferreira. First responders in St. Cloud, Florida, were dispatched to the home of a man who died following a medical emergency on April the 3rd of 2023. As paramedics were assessing the man, a police officer who'd responded to the scene got a hold of his credit card. 25-year-old Diana Ferreira reportedly took pictures of the card and entered the information into a mobile application with the intention of using it remotely, which she began doing the following day. Ferreira charged about $450 to the deceased man's card, all on her days off. The money was used for expenses like gas and food, but also to book a room at a hotel and purchase eyelash extensions. She attempted to charge the card twice after it had already been cancelled by the man's widow, who reported the card's suspicious activity to the authorities. After an investigation was launched, Ferreira admitted to her misdeeds and was immediately placed on unpaid administrative leave. She subsequently resigned from her position with the St. Cloud Police Department, which she'd held for about 11 months. In early May of 2023, the former officer was arrested and brought into custody with her own handcuffs. She was charged with theft of credit card information with intent to use and fraudulent use of a credit card over $200, both felonies, as well as a count of use of personal ID of a deceased person. Number 10. Jakaria Stringer. 25-year-old Jakaria Stringer didn't show up for her job as an officer with the Delray Beach Police Department in Florida for 21 days between March of 2020 and August of 2021, each time claiming she was on military leave. Stringer reportedly earned $6,553.44 in wages during the course of her 3 weeks of leave. However, as internal investigators uncovered in March of 2022, the young officer hadn't actually attended military training on any of the dates she was absent in that period. Detectives interviewed Stringer's Army Reserve platoon sergeant, who said she'd been issued multiple developmental counseling forms indicating she hadn't attended battle assembly or annual training on the days in question. For each of her absences, the young woman had either claimed to be sick or neglected to provide an excuse at all. Her repeated truancy ultimately led to her undergoing involuntary separation from the U.S. Army Reserve. Stringer falsified timesheets with the police department to uphold the deception that she was with her reserve unit. When her lies came to light, a warrant was issued for her arrest. She turned herself into the Palm Beach County Jail on charges of official misconduct and grand theft. Number 9. Christian Gallegos. The police in Little Rock, Arkansas were called to a home in the 6500 block of Brookview Drive during the early morning hours of September the 25th of 2022. Responding officers encountered one of their own, 29-year-old Christian Gallegos, who'd been on the force for 3 years. Gallegos was allegedly involved in a violent altercation with his domestic partner, which led to him being arrested on a charge of third-degree domestic battery. Family members told law enforcement that the man had struck the female victim during the incident. Gallegos underwent a line of questioning at the police department's Major Crimes Division before being booked at the Pulaski County Detention Center. As of the most recent updates, the situation was still being investigated by the Little Rock Police Department's Professional Standards Division. In the meantime, Gallegos was relieved of duty. Number 8. Zachary Wester. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement began investigating a Jackson County Sheriff's deputy during the summer of 2018.
The Internal Affairs probe was launched at the behest of the Jackson County Sheriff's Office itself, after allegations emerged regarding misconduct by Deputy Zachary Wester, at the time in his mid-20s. FDLE officials learned that between 2016 and 2018, Wester had routinely pulled motorists over for minor traffic infractions, only to plant illegal substances inside their vehicles and arrest them on phony drug charges. Internal investigators reportedly logged over 1,400 working hours on the case, during which more than 100 cases involving Wester were analyzed. 42 items of drug paraphernalia were found in the officer's patrol car, including 10 separately packaged quantities of methamphetamine and 5 separate quantities of marijuana. In body cam footage of the traffic stops Wester conducted, he was shown with what appeared to be baggies of the illegal substances in the moments before he conducted searches of the motorist's vehicles. As a result of the investigation, prosecutors dropped nearly 120 criminal cases involving suspects arrested by Wester. The latter was suspended following his arrest on charges of racketeering, official misconduct, fabricating evidence, perjury, false imprisonment, and possession of controlled substances and drug paraphernalia. During the resulting court proceedings, the prosecution requested that the disgraced cop be given a prison sentence of 15 years for his crimes. Conversely, Wester's friends and family provided an impassioned defense on his behalf. The man's wife pleaded with the judge for leniency, portraying her husband as a kind, church-going individual with a strong volunteer presence in the community. The court received over 50 letters from Wester's supporters, but in the end, Circuit Judge James Goodman handed down a 12.5-year prison term. In October of 2022, the situation garnered renewed public interest after 33 people who'd been victimized by Wester's traffic stop schemes reached a settlement in their federal lawsuits against the former North Florida cop. Number 7. Roger Golubski. In September of 2022, 69-year-old Roger Golubski, a former detective with the Kansas City, Kansas Police Department, faced legal repercussions for assaults he committed 2 decades earlier when he was still on the force. As detailed in court records, Golubski was indicted on 6 federal counts of deprivation of civil rights. The charges stemmed from an investigation into heinous accusations made against a former cop during court proceedings for a man he allegedly framed for murder. In 2017, Lamont McIntyre was liberated after spending 23 years in prison for a double homicide he didn't commit. McIntyre contended that Golubski had framed him allegedly on behalf of drug dealers who paid him off. The wrongfully convicted man was ultimately awarded a settlement of $12.5 million, but Golubski's legal troubles were only just beginning. One of the women deposed in the McIntyre case, Ophelia Williams, accused the former detective of repeatedly assaulting her over the course of several months. In 1999, another woman involved in the deposition, identified only by the initials SK, alleged that she too had experienced prolonged abuse at the hands of Golubski, starting when she was a teenager and continuing for 4 years thereafter. SK testified that when she was still a teen, she'd been found unconscious near a school bathroom after losing too much blood. It subsequently emerged that she'd miscarried, and Golubski, she contended, was the only one who could have gotten her pregnant. Federal law enforcement went to Golubski's Edwardsville home to arrest him on September the 15th of 2022. As of the latest developments, the investigation was still ongoing. Number 6. Julie Stunker. In November of 2021, Officer Julie Stunker of the Aurora Police Department in Colorado was involved in a physical altercation with her estranged partner at their home in Denver. The couple had reportedly been in the midst of divorce proceedings when the incident occurred. In the aftermath, Stunker, a 20-year-old police veteran, was charged with assault and disturbing the peace. Within a matter of days, she found herself back in handcuffs after she returned to the home to retrieve her pickup truck without notifying her colleagues. A restraining order had been put in place following the initial domestic episode, stipulating that other law enforcement officials needed to be present for Stunker to go back to the residence. Although her domestic violence charges were eventually dismissed, the case involving the restraining order violation was brought to trial in November of 2022. Stanka was found guilty and consequently sentenced to a year of supervised probation. She was also ordered to undergo domestic violence evaluation and treatment and was subject to a protection order that prohibited her from possessing, purchasing, or controlling a firearm. Stanka had been placed on administrative leave for 10 months following her arrest before working in a non-enforcement role within the department. The new position saw the veteran officer stripped of her police powers and completely kept away from contact with the public. After she was convicted of the restraining order violation, she was issued a letter from Aurora's police chief notifying her of her impending termination. Before she was fired, however, Stanka resigned in May of 2023. Number 5. Kwaku Riley Agyapong. Only hours into the 2023 New Year, a brutal altercation unfolded at a home in Burlington Avenue in Gaston County, North Carolina. According to a press release from the town of Ranlo, a police officer by the name of Kwaku Riley Agyapong had sustained multiple stab wounds during a fight fueled by a domestic dispute with 33-year-old Juan Nikely Avalo. The latter was fatally shot by the off-duty officer. The investigation into the incident was ultimately taken over by Gaston County Police, who obtained a warrant for 34-year-old Agyapong's arrest. He was held under observation at Carolmont Health in Gastonia before being booked into the Gaston County Jail on murder charges. Agyapong was subsequently terminated from the Ranlo Police Department. According to the local press, he'd previously worked for the Gastonia Police Department from October of 2019 to April of 2022 when he resigned. As North Carolina's State Bureau of Investigation continued to look into the matter, more and more details began to emerge about the players involved. Weeks prior to the shooting, Agyapong had gone to the victim's residence on a domestic call. Avalo later found out that the officer had started texting his wife. An argument erupted over the phone before Agyapong drove to the home and the deadly altercation ensued. Transcripts of the 911 calls made after the incident revealed that Avalo's wife had notified authorities of her husband's shooting. Meanwhile, Agyapong also dialed 911 but neglected to disclose that he'd just discharged his service weapon 5 times, only mentioning that he'd been stabbed. The man was transferred to the Cleveland County Jail for his own safety as he awaited his trial. Number 4. Christopher Pellant. Indiana man Christopher Pellant showed up at the Switzerland County Dispatch Center for work on the evening of July the 21st of 2022. The 39-year-old had just been sworn in as a member of the Vevey Police Department 1 month prior. On the day in question, several of Pellant's co-workers noticed he smelled like alcohol. A sheriff's deputy eventually approached the man's shift partner to ask whether he noticed anything strange about his behavior. Pellant's partner said he hadn't detected the smell of alcohol as others had, but did state that the newly minted officer's eyes were glassy. Vevey Police Chief David Wolf was subsequently notified of the situation. An investigation was launched, during which Pellant, who was on duty and in full uniform with his marked police car at the time, was asked to take a portable breathalyzer test. He reportedly blew .084, which ever so slightly exceeds the state's driving limit. Pellant told Chief Wolf that he downed 5 shots of Fireball whiskey the night before, but hadn't had any alcohol since past midnight. Nevertheless, he was immediately arrested by sheriff's deputies and fired from his job. After being booked at the Switzerland County Jail, Pellant faced charges of operating while intoxicated and official misconduct, a felony. Number 3. Zachary Tyler Bowen. At about 6:30 p.m. on March the 17th of 2019, a male motorist changed lanes while traveling along the outer loop of Interstate 695 in northern Maryland with a female passenger. After doing so, a Volkswagen Jetta pulled up alongside their car and the driver, believing he'd been cut off, pointed a handgun in their direction. The man and woman subsequently called 911 to report the road rage incident. They managed to provide enough of a description of the Jetta's driver for authorities to identify him as 28-year-old Tyler Bowen, a Maryland state trooper who was off duty at the time. Officers were sent to Bowen's residence in Reisterstown, where he was placed under arrest. He reportedly faced 2 counts of first-degree assault, 2 counts of second-degree assault and the use of a firearm in the commission of a violent crime or felony. Following his arrest, Bowen was immediately suspended without pay by the Maryland State Police. In subsequent reports, it was detailed how Bowen had been a sworn member of the department since January of 2012 and had most recently been working as part of the Automotive Safety Enforcement Division. Number 2. Darius Jared Morris. Authorities in Shreveport, Louisiana, received reports of a shooting in the 9100 block of Bushnell Lane on the morning of February the 19th of 2020. Officers responded to the scene at around 5 a.m., whereupon they found 27-year-old Reginald Jones suffering from a non-life-threatening gunshot wound to the leg. He was taken to a nearby hospital for treatment. Roughly 5 hours later, law enforcement took a suspect into custody, namely Darius Jared Morris, a Shreveport patrol officer. Investigators gathered that Morris and Jones had been embroiled in a dispute regarding a woman, which had led to the shooting. On the morning of the incident, the two men had argued at the Bushnell Lane address before Morris allegedly went home. The off-duty officer subsequently returned with a gun and texted Jones to come outside. As the latter, who was unarmed, approached Morris, he was shot in the leg, at which point the suspect fled. Officer Morris was consequently charged with attempted murder in the second degree. Records from the Caddo Parish Sheriff's Office indicated that he was released from custody in January of 2021, but no further updates were provided at that time. Number 1. Daniel Holtzclaw. In the early morning hours of June the 18th of 2014, Officer Daniel Holtzclaw from the Oklahoma City Police Department initiated a traffic stop on the city's northeast side. The driver, 57-year-old Janie Ligons, would later testify that Holtzclaw assaulted her, forcing her to lift up her shirt, pull down her pants, and perform intimate acts on him. Ligons, who said she feared for her life during the course of the attack, pleaded with the policeman to let her go, and when he finally did, she promptly filed a police report. As it would later emerge, Holtzclaw hadn't even been on duty at the time, having been on his way home after a completed shift when he encountered Ligons on the road. He didn't report the stop to dispatch and neglected to run a records check per police procedure. Holtzclaw reported to the OKCPD's Spring Lake Division the following day. During his shift, he was pulled aside by detectives Kim Davis and Rocky Gregory, who brought him into an interrogation room for a line of questioning. What ensued was a 2-hour inquisition in which Holtzclaw adamantly denied Ligons' accusations against him. The detectives took cheek swabs for DNA comparison and informed the officer that they believed he was being untruthful. He was placed on paid administrative leave pending further developments. After 2 months of investigation, a dozen additional complainants came forward with accusations of abuse against Holtzclaw, who was arrested on August the 21st of 2014. In the end, he faced 36 counts of abuse charges stemming from repeated assaults against primarily poor and African-American women with criminal records. Between December of 2013 and June of 2014, Holtzclaw would run background checks on women with outstanding warrants, then methodically target them with traffic stops in which he'd accost them. Ligons' assault deviated from his modus operandi, as she'd simply been passing through the impoverished area he usually targeted. The man pleaded not guilty to each of the charges levied against him, but was ultimately convicted of 18 of them. In January of 2016, he was punished for his crimes with a prison sentence of 263 years. The Drug Enforcement Administration opened an investigation into a narcotics trafficking operation that brought illicit substances across the border from Mexico into the US and eventually into New York City. Among those who participated in the conspiracy was 32-year-old Yesenia Jimenez, an NYPD officer living in the Bronx. According to the DEA's findings, Jimenez used her apartment to house large quantities of heroin, fentanyl, and cocaine that had been smuggled from Mexico. Along with her criminal associates, the woman helped distribute the drugs in New York and Boston, collecting hundreds of thousands of dollars in the process. Jimenez was accused of taking part in a conspiracy from at least June of 2017. until March of 2018 when she was arrested. Members of both the DEA and NYPD apprehended the suspect and an accomplice as they returned to her apartment with $52,000 in cash. It later emerged that the money they were carrying stemmed from recent narcotics transactions in the Boston area. Despite being off duty at the time, Jimenez was carrying her department-issued firearm in her purse. The woman lied to the arresting officers, telling them she was on official police business. Her claims of innocence ultimately fell on deaf ears, and she was hit with a number of serious criminal charges. In March of 2019, following a week-long trial, she was found guilty of conspiring to distribute heroin, fentanyl, and cocaine, possession of heroin and fentanyl, and using a firearm in furtherance of drug trafficking. The district court sentenced Jimenez to 192 months of imprisonment, followed by a 5-year term of supervised release. Number 22. Russell Maranto. Law enforcement in Loveland, Colorado, received reports of a woman wandering in and out of traffic while speaking incoherently on the night of May the 20th of 2023. Officers found the woman roaming the area near North Garfield Avenue and East 29th Street. She was placed in protective custody and brought to the hospital for evaluation. Loveland police later revealed that upon arrival at the hospital, the woman was handcuffed in an examination room. She was accused of being verbally abusive towards medical staff and reportedly spat on both a nurse and a police officer. In response, the latter punched the woman in the face, inflicting minor injuries. Another officer subsequently intervened and removed his colleague from the room. In the wake of the incident, the officer who struck the female suspect was identified as 28-year-old Russell Maranto. He was placed on administrative leave while his actions on the night in question were investigated. The following month, Loveland Police Chief Tim Duran released a video explaining his decision to fire Maranto for what he labeled an excessive use of force. In the spirit of transparency, Duran's video included body cam footage from the exam room, which showed the woman, identified as 59-year-old Angelia Hall, spitting on Maranto right before he socked her in the face. Hall was charged with third-degree assault for her actions towards the officer. Number 21. Donovan William Rojas. Several Monroe County deputies in Key Largo, Florida, chased a speeding Chrysler 300 down US Route 1 shortly before 4 a.m. on June the 12th of 2022. The vehicle was traveling at speeds of more than 110 miles per hour as it swerved in and out of different lanes. Pursuing deputies tailed the Chrysler for 3 miles before the suspect finally stopped at mile marker 105. The man behind the wheel identified himself as a member of the Miami-Dade Police Department, revealing that the Chrysler was his unmarked agency vehicle. Deputies reportedly observed emergency lights activated on the car's visor, which they hadn't been able to see during the pursuit. The motorist, who was later identified as 26-year-old Donovan William Rojas, was exhibiting signs of impairment and apparently smelled like alcohol. He refused sobriety tests, so deputies brought him to the county jail, where he was booked on charges of driving while intoxicated, as well as fleeing and eluding. Inside the Chrysler, investigators found 2 handguns, a Miami-Dade police ID and badge, and a department-issued body camera. Rojas was suspended from the force without pay following his arrest. Number 20. Pablo Estrada. During the early morning hours of November the 28th of 2020, Officer Pablo Estrada from the Lafayette Parish Sheriff's Office in Louisiana arrested a 23-year-old man accused of beating his pregnant girlfriend. The handcuffed suspect was transported to Lafayette Parish Correctional Center and held in a room while Officer Estrada filled out paperwork. Video footage of the 2 men inside the police station showed Estrada instructing the unnamed suspect to take a seat. Although issues with the camera system caused the audio to cut out at certain moments, the young man could be heard telling the officer that he wasn't trying to be difficult. He remained standing while Estrada sat behind a computer and once again ordered him to sit down. The suspect then took a step towards the officer, who quickly stood up saying, "Have a seat, I'm not playing with you." In the moments that followed, Estrada placed 2 hands on the suspect and pushed him against the wall before delivering a closed hand strike to his abdomen. The man protested Estrada's use of force, stating, "Y'all put your hands on me for nothing. I'm not even doing nothing." The suspect would go on to be indicted on battery charges stemming from the incident with his girlfriend, as well as resisting an officer for his non-compliance with Estrada. He pleaded not guilty to both offenses. Estrada, meanwhile, wasn't charged in connection with his rough treatment of the young man. He was, however, notified of his termination from the force on February the 22nd of 2021. Estrada challenged the police chief's decision by filing an appeal with the Lafayette Fire and Police Civil Service Board. In January of 2023, it was announced that Estrada had been reinstated to the department. The board reportedly determined that he hadn't violated department policy in any way. Number 19. Robert Rosen. On February the 11th of 2021, the Aurora Police Department in Colorado released a statement detailing the termination of Officer Robert Rosen for using excessive force during an arrest. The incident in question occurred in August of 2020 when Rosen was called to assist a fellow officer at the King Soopers grocery store on South Parker Road. Upon arrival, the officer found his colleague on the ground with a suspect who was passively resisting by laying on his stomach and keeping his arms pinned underneath his body without first attempting lesser means of force or issuing any verbal orders. Rosen sprung into action by briefly trying to pull the suspect's arms out from under him. When that failed, the officer began punching the man, hitting him multiple times in the ribs. He also deployed his taser 5 times for a total of 27 seconds. The suspect sustained minor injuries and was taken to a local hospital before being booked for allegedly trespassing on King Soopers property. Rosen's actions during the arrest were reviewed by the department's Force Review Board, which in turn recommended that the matter be investigated by the Internal Affairs Bureau. The resulting investigation uncovered that Rosen had failed to activate his body camera when he arrived at the scene that night. He also neglected to document his justifications for the force he used during the arrest. In all, Rosen was found to have violated 5 department directives and was consequently fired. Number 18. James Sanders. Officer James Sanders with the Social Circle Police Department in Georgia was involved in an incident on November the 23rd of 2016 that ultimately led to his termination a few weeks later. On the day in question, Sanders was on duty when he heard someone in a passing Jeep yell out, "F the police!" Outraged, Sanders proceeded to chase the vehicle down and initiate a traffic stop, which he neglected to radio into dispatch. The officer then interrogated the Jeep's teenage occupants, ultimately determining that it was the passenger who hurled the profane insult. Sanders ordered the teen out of the car and tormented him, trying to coax the boy into a physical fight. Eventually, another officer arrived at the scene and, as shown in body cam footage, admitted that the teens hadn't done anything to warrant being pulled over. Nevertheless, the 2 cops searched the Jeep as well as the teens, but let them go when it became clear they had nothing incriminating in their possession. An anonymous complaint to the Social Circle Police Department led to an internal review of the incident, culminating in Sanders getting fired in early December. Records indicated that Sanders had gotten into trouble before for harassing members of the public, including an instance where he allegedly threatened to taser a school administrator and blow up a building. Number 17. Gemma Dix and Adam Reed. Allegations of gross misconduct were leveled against a Welsh police constable during the summer of 2020. 28-year-old Gemma Dix was accused of having intimate relations with her superior on multiple occasions, including at various locations within Cardiff's Central Police Station. The junior officer's repeated encounters with Sergeant Adam Reed, a married father of 2, spanned 10 months. During at least one of their liaisons at the police station, which occurred between November of 2017 and August of 2018, Dix had allegedly been on duty. A misconduct panel ultimately ruled that her actions constituted a serious breach of professional behavior and amounted to gross misconduct that damaged the police service's reputation and community standing. After details of the affair came to light, 40-year-old Reed resigned from the force. In August of 2020, it was announced that Dix had been spared termination and was instead issued a written warning. Panel chairwoman Emma Boothroyd stated that she didn't accept Dix's claims that Reed had manipulated her into continuing their relationship. Boothroyd did, however, commend Dix for volunteering information about her encounters with Reed, as well as showing genuine remorse for her behavior. Number 16. Lords Haddonfield. In February of 2019, a police officer from Des Moines, Iowa, claimed to have been hit and injured by a car that was fleeing a traffic stop. 33-year-old Lords Haddonfield had worked on the force since June of 2017, having previously served as an officer for the Perry Police Department, about 40 miles northwest of Des Moines. Haddonfield filed a report detailing her alleged encounter with a female motorist who'd driven into the middle of a snow removal operation, only to speed away from the scene when confronted. The driver was later stopped along I-235 and faced charges of operating while intoxicated, as well as interference with official acts. An internal department investigation led to the discovery that Haddonfield hadn't been completely truthful in her report. In reality, she'd never been struck by the vehicle, as she claimed. The internal review also found that Haddonfield lied under oath during a deposition preparing for the criminal charges against the driver, identified as Alicia Holker. As a result of the officer's untruthfulness, Holker had the charge of interference with official acts dropped. The woman claimed to have driven away from the traffic stop because Haddonfield was being abusive. The officer acknowledged the inaccuracies in her official report, which she claimed to have written entirely from memory without referencing her body cam footage. In July of 2019, Haddonfield was fired from her job. Number 15. Kashif Mahmood. A massive corruption scandal hit Greater London's Metropolitan Police Service in the spring of 2021. Per the findings of an official investigation, Officer Kashif Mahmood collaborated with an organized crime ring based in Dubai to steal money from drug dealers. 5 other suspects were charged in connection with the case and ended up receiving prison sentences of up to 16 years as punishment. In court, the sophisticated crime group's leader in Dubai was identified as Mujaba Niazmund. Using encrypted messaging platforms to communicate, Niazmund would inform the gang's UK leader, Moshin Khan, about drug couriers carrying large amounts of money. In turn, Khan would pass the details on to Mahmood, a police officer of 10 years. Mahmood used police cars from Stoke Newington Police Station and had an accomplice pose as his partner. They would then stop and search the targets, many of whom had been given the cash by the Khan gang as part of a drug deal. After seizing the money under the guise of police procedure, Mahmood would hand it over to his criminal associates, who ended up with both the drugs and money from the transaction. In total, the group stole over $1 million from drug dealers, according to prosecutors. In early 2020, French police and cybersecurity experts penetrated EncroChat, the encrypted network used by the Khan gang. The collapse of EncroChat contributed to the crime group's demise, as did a series of blunders on the part of Mahmood and his associates. During one of the gang's jobs, they unwittingly targeted a drug courier who was being monitored by law enforcement. Surveillance officers stopped Mahmood and his partner after witnessing them seize cash from the courier. They forced him to create an intelligence report back at the police station, which would ultimately be used as evidence against him in court. Additionally, Mahmood's body camera inadvertently turned on during the unauthorized stop, capturing his accomplice dressed in a police uniform. In May of 2021, Mahmood was sentenced to 8 years behind bars. Number 14. Matthew Rodriguez. The police in Warren, Michigan, arrested a carjacking suspect and brought him to the city jail for booking on June the 12th of 2023. While the suspect, identified as Jaquan Smith, was being processed, Officer Matthew Rodriguez launched a vicious physical attack on him. As captured by the jail's security cameras, 48-year-old Rodriguez suddenly lunged towards Smith and knocked him to the ground. He proceeded to bash the suspect's head against the floor before striking him again. Although the footage didn't include audio, Warren Police Commissioner Bill Dwyer indicated that there might have been words exchanged between Rodriguez and Smith prior to the attack. Nevertheless, Dwyer labeled the officer's actions as completely unjustified and unprofessional, stating he was shocked and appalled by the video. Rodriguez was placed on paid leave in the immediate aftermath. He was ultimately charged with assault and battery. A couple of weeks after the incident, he was fired from the police department. Number 13. Emily Hershowitz. In August of 2022, Ossining Village Police Chief Kevin Sylvester filed a complaint with the Westchester District Attorney's Office in New York over threatening messages sent to one of his officers. 36-year-old Emily Hershowitz first revealed the alleged harassment she'd been suffering back in May of that year. She told the DA's office that she'd been receiving anonymous threats from multiple different phone numbers. The officer further claimed that some of her colleagues were likely behind the messages. As the issue drew more attention from the public and investigators, however, suspicions began to arise regarding the true source of the anonymous threats. By October, authorities had gathered enough evidence to obtain a search warrant for Hershowitz's phone and digital records. It was established that the woman controlled the phone numbers responsible for the menacing texts and that she'd actually sent the messages to herself. She was consequently charged with 4 counts of third-degree falsely reporting an incident, as well as 3 counts of first-degree filing a false instrument. During the investigation, Police Chief Sylvester had tried to blame the threats on Officer Luis Rinaldi, who later sued the chief after being forced to resign. In the wake of Hershowitz's arrest, Sylvester suspended her with pay, which many viewed as lenient. When Rinaldi and co-plaintiff Andrea Zambrano filed litigation against Sylvester, they alleged that the chief was in an intimate relationship with Hershowitz and had therefore doled out a lighter punishment for her. They further claimed that Sylvester had tried to pin Hershowitz's crimes on them despite having no evidence to support his accusations. As of the latest developments, the multifaceted situation hadn't yet been resolved. Number 12. Alexander Shaoni. A Seminole County Sheriff's deputy conducted a traffic stop along Florida Avenue north of Oviedo on June the 6th of 2023. The deputy had observed an Orlando Police Department cruiser traveling at upwards of 80 miles per hour in a 45-mile-per-hour zone with no lights or sirens activated. He gave chase in the area of Florida Avenue and De Leon Street, but the runaway cruiser refused to pull over. Eventually, the deputy managed to pull in front of the OPD vehicle to make it stop. The individual behind the wheel of the cruiser got out to meet the deputy dressed in full police uniform. Later identified as Officer Alexander Shaoni, the man refused to show the deputy his driver's license, stating he was on his way to work. He subsequently got back in the cruiser and sped off. Shortly thereafter, the Orlando Police Department announced that Shaoni had been relieved of duty. Pending further investigation, he also faced criminal charges of reckless driving, fleeing and eluding law enforcement, and resisting an officer without violence. Body cam footage of the deputy's encounter with Shaoni went viral in the incident's aftermath. In August of 2023, it was reported that Shaoni had entered a pre-trial intervention agreement which required 12 months of supervision. The agreement included $500 worth of fines and fees, as well as a mandate that Shaoni complete 40 hours of community service and apologize to the deputy who pulled him over. If the officer completed each of the requirements, his criminal charges would be dropped. Number 11. Telvin Wilson. An Arkansas cop was busted trying to solicit intercourse from a minor who was actually an undercover police officer during the summer of 2023. 31-year-old Telvin Wilson from Texarkana was one of 3 suspects caught through a sting operation conducted by law enforcement in the Twin City of Texarkana, Texas. Investigators placed an advertisement on a website used by escorts, then posed as a minor in subsequent conversations with potentially interested clients. Wilson and the other men agreed to meet up with the decoy at a house. However, when they knocked on the front door, they were met by police officers rather than the girl they were expecting. Wilson, who began his career in law enforcement in 2016, was charged with online solicitation of a minor. He was held in custody on a $100,000 bond. In an eerie twist, it was revealed that the man had once described himself as a figure that our young people can come and talk to in a spotlight Facebook post just a few months before his arrest. The two other suspects linked to the sting operation were 33-year-old Adarius Wills and James Willis, aged 37. As of the most recent updates, they were both in custody with several pending criminal charges. Number 10. Johnny Diaz. On May the 23rd of 2018, New York cop Johnny Diaz arrested a drug dealer but failed to report $1,000 in cash that he recovered from the man. In the days and weeks that followed, 48-year-old Diaz kept in close contact with the dealer, and the two established a professional rapport. The officer reportedly offered to return the dealer's cell phone from an evidence locker and, in return, received a $250 bottle of Johnny Walker Blue Scotch. As their relationship developed, Diaz even offered to throw out the man's pending criminal case in exchange for $20,000. Then, on June the 15th, he helped the dealer transport over 2 pounds of cocaine in exchange for $4,000, telling his criminal associate, "I should know better, I'm a cop." By the end of June, Diaz was arrested and was facing a slew of charges that included first-degree possession of a controlled substance. Diaz's undoing had been his relationship with the drug dealer, who, as it turned out, was an undercover investigator. Police officials had opened an internal probe into Diaz following allegations that he was offering criminals freedom in exchange for money. In August, the crooked cop pleaded guilty to second-degree criminal possession of a controlled substance, second-degree bribery, and petty larceny. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison for his crimes. Number 9. Alicia Bajraktarovich. On April the 29th of 2023, NYPD officers stopped a vehicle belonging to a local dealer who was described as a major player in the city's drug trade. Before they could investigate the suspect and potentially arrest him for trafficking, however, officers were met by the man's girlfriend, Alicia Bajraktarovich, aged 33. The latter, a Yonkers resident who'd been a police officer for 11 years, launched a belligerent tirade in an attempt to prevent her colleagues from busting her boyfriend. Bajraktarovich became so uncooperative, in fact, that the officers at the scene needed to call for backup in order to subdue her. In the end, the dealer was allowed to go free, while law enforcement filed a report about Bajraktarovich's behavior. Following the events of the traffic stop, the woman had her service weapon confiscated and was reassigned to desk duty, while detectives investigated her association with the dealer. According to subsequent reports, Bajraktarovich had been warned to stay away from the man, who was already under police surveillance at the start of their relationship. She'd previously tried to intervene when cops showed up at the dealer's Manhattan residence and was subsequently urged by colleagues to end their involvement. Number 8. Nasia Stroud. 29-year-old Nasia Stroud, a 6-year veteran of the NYPD, assigned to the Fleet Services Division, was arrested for serving as a drug courier in the spring of 2017. Between the months of April and June, Stroud was paid $2,000 to transport illegal substances to another courier. She used codes to cover up her activities, devising the phrase "shopping at Woodbury" for any communications involving future drug drop-offs. Stroud allegedly told the courier that she was a police officer, stating that she would flash her badge to avoid further investigation if they were ever stopped by law enforcement. Her plan to avoid getting arrested evidently didn't work, as she was in handcuffs by mid-June. Internal investigators had already been looking into Stroud by the time she'd started delivering drugs. She'd been placed on modified duty, which meant she'd been stripped of her service weapon and limited to desk work. The courier with whom she'd been doing business was actually an undercover detective. The woman consequently faced charges of criminal possession and official misconduct. In May of the following year, a judge found Stroud guilty on all charges. She tearfully begged for the verdict to be thrown out while appearing in Manhattan Supreme Court in June. She indicated that a felony conviction would prevent her from joining the army, which she'd always dreamed of doing. Nevertheless, the presiding judge showed no leniency, sentencing Stroud to 8 years behind bars for her crimes. Number 7. Nidia Garcia. Nidia Garcia, who worked for police in the Mexican city of Escobedo, was fired after a photo of her posing topless in her patrol vehicle made the rounds on social media in April of 2016. The racy picture showed Garcia flashing her bare chest while wearing her police uniform and holding a rifle. On Facebook, the woman admitted to taking the picture while on duty, but denied uploading it to social media. Police officials opened an investigation into the matter, but Garcia resigned before a resolution could be reached. Some have speculated that the woman quit her job in order to pursue one of the many modeling opportunities presented to her in the wake of the nude picture scandal. Subsequent reports mentioned that several men's magazines and local businessmen had expressed interest in capitalizing on Garcia's sudden popularity. The controversy caused irrevocable damage to the former cop's family, as it reportedly prompted her husband to leave her. After ending her law enforcement career, the mother of two was said to have started working as a table dancer in gentlemen's clubs across Mexico. Number 6. Karina Salgado. Early on the morning of November the 1st of 2019, Chicago police dispatched officers to the 3700 block of North Broadway. A tipster had contacted them about a woman who'd been denied entry to a Boys Town nightclub. The establishment, which featured a dance club and drag shows, had repeatedly turned the woman in question away, but she kept trying to sneak in regardless. Officers tracked down the individual, who was reportedly wearing red and white face paint, apparently as part of a Pennywise Halloween costume. They informed her that she wasn't allowed to go into the nightclub, but nevertheless, she attempted to get into the building yet again, so they physically blocked her path. Shortly after, the woman, who was intoxicated, slapped an officer in the face with an open hand. She was consequently arrested and charged with misdemeanor counts of criminal damage to property, battery, and resisting or obstructing a peace officer. Subsequent reports on the matter identified the suspect as 30-year-old Karina Salgado, an off-duty police officer. Following her arrest, Salgado was moved to a non-emergency role within the department, pending further investigation. Number 5. Melissa Adamson. A Pennsylvania cop lost her job after a Snapchat selfie with text that included a racial slur started circulating online on September the 27th of 2016. The offensive post, uploaded by McKeesport police officer Melissa Adamson, triggered a social media firestorm following its re-emergence. It was determined that Adamson had originally taken the picture several months prior when she'd worked for a different police department in Pitcairn. While speaking with a local media outlet, Adamson said the post was a stupid mistake. She claimed that it was making the rounds months after she uploaded it because she had an altercation with a former colleague who was bringing up dirt from her past and trying to ruin her career. The controversy surrounding the selfie, which prompted an official statement from the mayor of McKeesport, caused Adamson to lose her job with the local police department. She was also terminated from her part-time position with Versailles Police. Number 4. Lester Brown. On the evening of December the 1st of 2018, Jose Garcia was arrested by Miami area police after a complaint was made about a drunk man breaking a house window. The suspect was taken to Miami-Dade County Jail for processing on charges of disorderly intoxication and resisting arrest. As Garcia was being escorted into the booking room, a Homestead police officer abruptly shoved him face first into a concrete wall. The suspect immediately started bleeding from a cut on his forehead, which was treated with surgical glue at the hospital. In the resulting case report, Officer Lester Brown claimed that Garcia had been physically resisting him and was trying to attack other officers at the jail. Brown further stated that at one point, Garcia fell forward and cracked his head on the wall accidentally. None of the officer's colleagues could substantiate his claims. The other officers at the scene reportedly observed Brown pushed the suspect unprovoked. Witness testimony was corroborated by video footage taken from the jail security cameras. As a result, Brown was arrested and charged with felony battery and official misconduct. Homestead Police Chief Alexander Rolle Jr. stated in a press conference that Brown had been suspended without pay pending his likely termination. Number 3. the Dirty 30. During the early 1990s, corruption was rampant among New York City police officers, especially those stationed in the Harlem neighborhood of Upper Manhattan. The issue became so pervasive that the city's mayor appointed a judge to create the Mullen Commission. The mandate was aimed at investigating and removing corrupt forces within the NYPD. In 1992, Sergeant Kevin Nannery began overseeing a collection of about 30 corrupt officers. The group, most of whom were stationed at the 30th Precinct in Harlem, would regularly take part in booming. The illegal process entailed making fake radio calls to cover up unauthorized search and seizures at known drug dealers' apartments. The Dirty 30, as they would come to be known as, would steal drugs and money from criminals' homes, then sell the illegal substances at half price right from the 30th Precinct. The group was also accused of extorting criminals, forcing illegal drug wholesalers to give them a weekly payoff in exchange for freedom. The Dirty 30 eventually collapsed after a former member went undercover for an internal investigation. A total of 33 officers, including Nannery, were arrested in connection with the scandal. They faced charges that included civil rights conspiracy, perjury, extortion, and grand larceny, as well as the possession and distribution of narcotics. Number 2. Betty Jo Shelby. On the evening of September the 16th of 2016, police in Tulsa, Oklahoma, received a call about an abandoned vehicle blocking traffic in the middle of 36th Street North. Responding officers encountered a man later identified as 40-year-old Terrence Crutcher standing in the street near the apparently stalled vehicle. One of the officers, Betty Jo Shelby, would later state that she believed Crutcher was under the influence of PCP, which turned out to be an accurate assessment. A police helicopter arrived at the scene and the officers inside were recorded saying, "This guy's still walking and isn't following commands. It's time for a taser, I think. That looks like a bad dude too. Could be on something." Shortly thereafter, as Crutcher was walking back to his vehicle with his hands up, Officer Tyler Turnbull deployed his taser while Shelby fired her service weapon. It took multiple minutes for someone to administer Crutcher aid after the bullet Shelby fired struck him in the chest. He succumbed to his injuries in the hospital later that day. The officers involved were placed on paid leave in the immediate aftermath. Eventually, authorities launched a criminal investigation into the shooting. A week later, the Tulsa County District Attorney filed first-degree manslaughter charges against Shelby. She turned herself into the county jail and was held for 20 minutes before posting bail. A vocal contingent of the general public denounced Shelby's actions on the day of Crutcher's death. The incident sparked protests outside the county courthouse and a civil rights probe by the U.S. Department of Justice. During the trial, the jury questioned Shelby's judgment as a law enforcement officer. They also expressed their belief that serious consideration should be given to whether she be allowed to return to the force. In the end, however, the jury found Shelby not guilty of first-degree manslaughter. She quit the Tulsa Police Department, subsequently becoming a Rogers County Sheriff's Deputy. Number 1. Ghalib Chowdhury. In June of 2023, Houston authorities responded to the 10300 block of Clay Road near Shadowdale, where a woman had reportedly been shot in the face. The victim, 30-year-old Sadeth Iqbal, was taken to the hospital for emergency surgery but ultimately survived. Investigators determined that Iqbal had been shot by her husband, Ghalib Chowdhury, a Houston police officer who was off duty at the time. The man was arrested and charged with aggravated assault of a family member with serious bodily injury. In a subsequent press conference, HPD Chief Troy Finner mentioned that the department was viewing the matter as a case of domestic violence that started as an argument. During initial talks with Iqbal, she told investigators that the shooting had been an accident. However, after Chowdhury's charges were filed, the woman changed her tune. She said she'd initially protected her husband because she was afraid that his position as a policeman might prevent him from getting criminally charged. Local media outlets gained access to angry messages that Chowdhury sent to Iqbal shortly before the shooting. Investigators also recovered syringes and doses of clenbuterol. a stimulant typically abused by bodybuilders and athletes. The DEA reportedly linked the drug to significant adverse effects, including agitation and anxiety. A sweep of the couple's northwest Houston apartment also unearthed passports, weapons, ammunitions, and various other items. Chowdhury was held in custody on a $125,000 bond. With his criminal case pending, the man was terminated by the Houston Police Department. In May of 2020, Yesenia Garcia and a friend returned to the former's parked car in Scottsdale, Arizona, to find that the windshield had been badly cracked. She consequently flagged down bike cop Nicholas Fay. He approached the duo alongside Scottsdale Police Supervisor Sergeant Ben Steele. Garcia didn't receive the assistance she'd hoped for, as one of the cops told her, "Here's the deal. We kind of already know what's going on." He warned Garcia not to lie before accusing her that she'd been involved in a hit and run in which a pedestrian had been hurt. Steele proceeded to read Garcia her Miranda rights, telling her and her friend, "Don't make faces like you don't know what I'm talking about." For roughly 45 minutes, Garcia insisted she was innocent, and her friend showed the police card transactions indicating they'd just been at a bar. Garcia urged the officers to question nearby security guards and to check surveillance footage from the area. Fay and Steele refused to do so, claiming that the car's hood was still warm, that they'd seen it pull into the parking space moments prior, and that there were pieces of broken glass in Garcia's clothing, which later proved to be a complete fabrication. Garcia was arrested on 2 counts of DUI and failure to stop at the scene of an accident causing injury or death. At the station, she was asked to strip in front of 2 female police officers so that the supposed glass on her clothes could be examined. Police had also obtained a warrant to take blood from her for a toxicology analysis. When Garcia asked to see it, as was her legal right, she was reportedly refused and told, "Put your arm out so we don't have to tie you down like an animal." Garcia was released after complying with the officer's orders and subsequently hired an attorney. He obtained surveillance footage from the parking lot, which showed a stranger jumping on her hood and stomping on her windshield a full hour before she'd returned to the car. Had Fay and Steele checked the surveillance footage like the woman had asked, her arrest would have likely been avoided. The charges against the woman were dropped after her attorney sent the police the clip. Aside from the harrowing experience of being wrongfully charged with a crime, the incident had nearly cost Garcia her job. Her employer considered terminating her position after seeing her mugshot in news reports. In May of 2021, Garcia filed a federal lawsuit against the department and the officers involved in the arrest. Number 6. Portia Woodruff. As she was preparing her 2 children for school on February the 16th of 2023, Detroit woman Portia Woodruff saw 6 police officers approaching her home. 32-year-old Woodruff was shocked upon being shown an arrest warrant in her name for robbery and carjacking. The woman, who was a month away from giving birth, was handcuffed and taken to the local jail. She spent the day in a cell and was later released on a $100,000 personal bond. Woodruff experienced dehydration while she was being detained and subsequently had to be taken to a medical center after complaining of sharp pain, muscle spasms, and panic attacks. She was completely innocent of the crimes with which she was being charged. Less than 3 weeks earlier, an unnamed 25-year-old man had picked up a woman and they had relations after drinking together in his car at a BP gas station. He then dropped her off in the area, at which point a man with a pistol ambushed him, took his wallet, and drove off in his Chevy Malibu. The assailant was arrested a few days later. A woman matching the victim's description of his female accomplice was captured on CCTV at the gas station. Detective LaShawntia Oliver requested a facial recognition search by independent vendor DataWorks Plus. on the footage. Woodruff was suggested based on a 2015 mugshot that she had on record after having been pulled over for driving without a license. Her photo was among a lineup of several others shown to the victim, and he mistakenly pointed to her as the culprit, leading to her arrest. The charges against Woodruff were dropped 18 days later. She filed a lawsuit against Oliver, alleging that the detective stated in detail in her report what she observed in the video footage, and there was no mention of the female suspect being pregnant. Number 5. Desnica Kilpatrick. On February the 21st of 2021, the Collinsville Police Department in Illinois received reports of an armed robbery at 258 Skyline View Drive. The female victim had allegedly agreed to sell marijuana to another woman, but upon arrival, the former and her companions were ambushed by 2 armed men. They were robbed of drugs and money, while the victim was also pistol whipped. An investigation unfolded over the next few days, and the police received information, which later proved to be inaccurate, that an out-of-state white BMW had been involved in the incident. At around 8 a.m. on March the 1st, Desnica Kilpatrick and her teenage brother were sitting in a parked white BMW with out-of-state plates on Summit Avenue in Collinsville. Officers mistook them for the suspects and approached the vehicle with weapons drawn. Frightened and confused, Kilpatrick and her brother were placed in handcuffs and taken to the back of the police cruiser. Kilpatrick later spoke to the media saying, "I was so afraid, like I couldn't stop shaking. I couldn't stop crying. I just knew that this was not real. We didn't do anything to deserve this." Officers soon realized they'd made a mistake. According to the official police statement on the incident, the brother and sister were released from the scene with an explanation and an apology. Roughly 7 minutes after the initial traffic stop, Kilpatrick, however, revealed that the apology did little to comfort her, as the experience had left her traumatized and distrustful of law enforcement. Number 4. Jermel English. On July the 20th of 2023, law enforcement in Kenosha, Wisconsin, responded to a serious hit-and-run accident of which witnesses told them that they'd seen the suspects, 2 black men and a woman with a young child, run into a nearby Applebee's. Officers entered the establishment and approached Jermel English, who was carrying his 1-year-old son. English was joined by a woman named Shania Boyd. As reported by Jennifer Harris, the Applebee's manager working that night, the police demanded English show them the car he'd come with so that they could determine if he'd taken part in the accident. English told them to go away and that he needed to change his son's diaper. He was still holding the child in his arms when he tried to walk away, but he was tackled into a wall by the officers. The altercation that followed was captured on bystander cell phone video. The baby was ripped from English's arms after the police had brought him to the ground. Pepper spray was reportedly deployed, and one officer was seen raining down punches on English while yelling at him to put his hands behind his back. While trying to hold back tears, Harris would later tell a media outlet, "It's just sad. I just felt bad for the baby that he had to go through that traumatic event." It would emerge that English and Boyd had had nothing to do with the hit and run. The real suspects had actually been hiding in the bathroom the entire time. Nevertheless, English was arrested on charges of disorderly conduct and resisting police, while Boyd was arrested on the same charges with an additional charge of marijuana possession. Footage of the incident sparked outrage online, and community activists protested outside the Kenosha Safety Building in the days that followed. The police department announced that it had launched an internal investigation to determine if the use of force from its officers was more robust than what the state requires. Updates from late August of 2023 indicated that rapper Jay-Z's Team Rock Nation's Philanthropic and Social Justice Division, had intervened to help English by hiring decorated attorney Alex Spiro. The latter goal was to get the charges dropped and potentially sue Kenosha law enforcement. Manager Harris also hired an attorney when she was terminated after having worked at Applebee's for 12 years. She reported, "They told me they can't trust me and that I didn't just ruin this Applebee's name, I ruined all the Applebee's in Wisconsin's name by letting these videos get out. However, Harris denied both recording the videos and posting them online. Number 3. Ryan Gould. In May of 2023, Ryan Gould went swimming in the community pool of his Sabal Ridge apartment complex in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida, as he routinely did for his workout. A woman then approached the pool and asked Gould to swim elsewhere, even though, as surveillance footage indicated, there didn't seem to be anyone else in the pool at the time. Gould refused to leave and the woman began swimming perpendicular to his path, repeatedly interrupting him. Gould waited on a ladder for his turn but eventually asked the woman if she could use the longer length of the pool so that they could both swim at the same time. The woman then got out and called her boyfriend. He arrived at the scene and argued with Gould before, as captured by CCTV, he lifted his shirt, flashing a concealed pistol. Gould backed away from the armed man, gathered his possessions and left the area before calling 911 to report the incident. Upon reaching the complex, a Palm Beach Gardens officer went to the pool area and talked with the man and woman who'd threatened Gould. They were reportedly arrested. Then Officer Bethany Guerrero arrived at the scene, marched towards Gould and inexplicably started yelling orders at him. The latter, still wet and only wearing his swimming trunks, was confused and started waving, trying to direct her attention to the pool area. He reached into his pocket and grabbed his phone, but Guerrero ordered him to stop reaching. She brandished her service weapon, her hands shaking with anger, and ordered Gould to the ground. The officer reportedly told him to be quiet, saying, "I've been here for 20 years, punk. I'm in charge, not you." The more Gould tried to explain he was the victim, the angrier the officer got. The two-time victim was thus handcuffed and arrested, but neither he nor the other officers had any idea why. They nevertheless went ahead with Guerrero's decision, trusting that the veteran officer had seen something they missed. Video surveillance clips of the wrongful arrest went viral on social media, some of them titled "Innocent Man Arrested by Unhinged Cop." Such had been Guerrero's rage that she left the scene in an ambulance after her heart rate spiked and she complained of chest pain. Gould was taken to jail with body cam footage, CCTV clips, and statements from all the other officers at the scene would fully absolve him of any guilt. Guerrero herself would claim to have confused him with the gun owner, but the statement reportedly didn't align with her behavior at the scene, as she hadn't taken cover behind her police vehicle, hadn't searched Gould for a gun, or even asked if he was armed. In the wrongful arrest wake, Gould stated that he was an easygoing guy who could forgive and forget, before adding, "But being kidnapped from your home at gunpoint seems like where I need to draw the line." An internal review of the incident and Guerrero's past offenses produced a 126-page investigative report that led to the 19-year veteran being fired from the force. The disgraced officer's past transgressions included using the police database to stalk a former partner, behaving inappropriately towards a person under arrest, and leaving her AR-15 rifle inside her patrol car, which was then burglarized. Number 2. Julie Hudson. In early January of 2023, Philadelphia PhD candidate Julie Hudson, aged 31, went to a local police station after finding out that there was a warrant out for her arrest. She'd faced trouble finding a rental property and failed job interviews due to background checks. Hudson went to clear her name but was arrested instead and set for extradition to Texas, where the warrant originated. The woman had never even been to Texas. It eventually emerged that Hudson shared a name with a woman suspected of shoplifting in Harris County, even though she'd gone to the station voluntarily to mend an obvious error. Hudson would spend 6 days locked up due to paperwork and communication issues between the Philadelphia and Harris County authorities. She reported to have been detained in horrible conditions prior to being released on January the 11th and subsequently issued an apology by the authorities. Hudson and her lawyer, Shaka Johnson, publicly shared the story on Good Morning Philadelphia. Hudson's stated objective was to ensure that innocent people wouldn't have to go through the same experience. The woman recalled that she'd been repeatedly told it was a common mistake before she poignantly pointed out it shouldn't be. Number 1. Jorge Molina. 24-year-old Arizona man Jorge Molina was approached by Avondale police at his Macy's job and arrested on murder charges in December of 2018. Molina had become the primary suspect in the killing of 29-year-old Joseph Knight. In March of 2018, Knight was fatally shot 9 times outside of his Avondale apartment, and the police had struggled to find the person responsible during the investigation that followed. The only piece of evidence available to them was grainy surveillance footage of a white Honda with an unreadable license plate recorded at the scene of the shooting. Investigators asked for help from Google, requesting geofence information on all the accounts active in the area around the time of the murder. 4 accounts were provided, including Molina's, who coincidentally drove a white Honda. The man spent 6 days in jail before the case against him fell apart and prosecutors declined to press charges. By then, however, it was too late, as he'd been fired from his job. In 2020, Molina sued the police, seeking $1.5 million in damages. The suit alleged defamation, gross negligence, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. In the wake of the arrest, Molina was unable to find employment as he failed background checks, and news of the arrest also featured prominently whenever his name was Googled. Additionally, the suit noted that the Google data should have never been used as evidence because the company allowed multiple users to be simultaneously logged into one account from multiple devices and locations. Moreover, the data couldn't actually identify the owner of the device, nor the phone number or IP address associated with the device. Molina's lawyers found multiple past discrepancies in his location data, which they claimed should have been regarded as a disqualifying factor. In one case, Google records showed that he was at his mother's workplace in Scottsdale, when Molina's debit card transactions indicated he'd actually been making a purchase 30 miles away at a Walmart. Thanks for watching. Would you rather be operated on by a one-eyed surgeon or be represented in court by your most recent ex? Let us know in the comments section below.